Alan Jones with HiFi Buys. If I get Chris in the background, if you don't mind, all I see is the two logos. So let me make sure. Okay, I'm probably just on a different view. My apologies, guys. That's my inexperience. Listen, I want to welcome y'all to HiFi Buys. My name is Alan Jones, owner of HiFi Buys, and this is HiFi Chats number 14. We are so happy to have Garth Powell, the Senior Director of Engineering at AudioQuest. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good. It's wonderful to have you here. I've got a lot of experience with your products, and very excited to have this conversation because it's literally the last 2-3 years of my being here at the store has really been about the reduction of noise, which I know most of this stuff has to do with. So anyway, if I can, I want to get through just a little bit of some housekeeping. If y'all don't mind, on your screen there, you'll see a place to like and subscribe. That helps us have more followers and helps more and more people see it and helps us be more important to Google. So we'd appreciate it if you do so. Also, if you don't mind going to hifibuys.com and sign up for our newsletter, it'll keep you advised on what's going on. We've got a lot of things happening here at the store, and we do a HiFi Buys or a HiFi Chats every Friday at 2 o'clock. That may change as we go down the road as people's lives change a little bit. As we all know, it's a very liquid situation, so we'll figure out how that works. And I also want to tell everybody, please, let's all just be careful out there and do our best to be kind to one another, and you know, realize that we have to do the right things for others to make sure that, you know, we all can stay as healthy as possible. And anyway, I'm trying to go see my parents. I don't know how, but they're in their mid to late 80s, and I would love to go see them. And so I'm gonna have to figure out how to do that. And so I'm in the process of doing that as we speak. But anyway, also I want to let everybody know for a few weeks now, we've been open 11 to 4. That's Monday through Saturday. We've also been on the phones pretty much from the mornings till evenings, which is generally about 9 o'clock to about 7 p.m. If anybody needs an appointment outside of those times or just wants to call, we'd love to help. Okay. So Garth, you ready to get into this?
Absolutely, thanks.
Awesome. I'm excited about this. So let's get to know you a little bit. Tell us about your family and where you grew up.
I grew up in Central California, which is a place called Visalia, California. Not really well known, but it is longitude and latitude almost smack dab in the middle of California.
Wow. Awesome. Awesome. Family?
Yeah, mom and dad, 3 other siblings. I'm third brother, and then I have a younger sister.
Awesome. Boy, she was well protected. Awesome.
Well, sort of. I mean, fortunately, it was a safe place anyways, but yeah. My dad was mostly bluster, but I don't think he would have done well in a scrap. My oldest brother was cantankerous, but other than his steel tip, you know, like work boots, he was in construction. I don't think really that dangerous. My immediately older brother was a deadhead and a peacenik. Wow. I'm worthless in any kind of fight. And, you know, like my younger sister probably be the best of any of us in a scrap. So not so much in that particular regard, but my loving family nonetheless.
I meant that more in a lighter degree, but sounds like she had her own, I guess, which is good. Tell us about some hobbies.
Okay. So essentially, I have been a variation on the same person, just attempting to get better at everything from the time I was a very young child. In fact, from what I understand from my mother, from before I have any memories, it was always sound. It was always audio. It was my own record player by 2, which was their self-defense mechanism to keep me from destroying their record collection, and constantly getting into it and constantly trying to play things, no matter how many times they forbade me. So they got me my own little, you know, like Newcomb with the ceramic cartridge that, you know, like digs a trench in your vinyl. Mm-hmm. And I was apparently by 3 taking it apart and putting it back together again. So there was that. My older brother worked at a pro bicycle shop in the 1970s when I was a small kid. I love my older brother, really loved cycling at a time that it wasn't popular. This was before Greg LeMond, you know, like was racing. Bicycle racing in America was like, what's that? Why would anybody have an expensive bike? What do you do with that? But in the Central Valley, we were at the foot of the Sequoia Mountains, which are really beautiful, the oldest redwoods in the world. And I was allowed, thanking my parents for this, this was, like just the opposite period of helicopter parenting. For them, it was just like four, boisterous kids that were constantly in their hair. They were thrilled to let me go out, like all day long, and just trusted me to get back in one piece. So I would be doing 80 to 100-mile rides from the time I was 12 and 13 years old, going up to the mountains and back again.
What an incredible place. I've been there. I mean, the Redwoods are just, I don't know, it just seems like they stop time when you're around them, and it's pretty amazing. I wrote a poem about being out there when I was out there. It still sits with me in a big way, and I can't wait to go back.
Yeah, so essentially it's that and music. And so the engineering started, or the wanting to be an audio engineer started really early, started training, like I'm probably around age 15, and knew I wanted to be a professional musician. Started private lessons at age 11.
Wow.
That's it.
That's awesome. Tell us about life experiences, things that have had an impact on who you are.
Oh gosh, so many things. Probably, again, like as I was just sort of describing, the fact that, like I'm at a really early age, knowing that I wanted to do something with music, but, in an age before the internet, like decades before that, and also living in, particularly at that time, if we traveled on a vacation or something like that, even into my teenage years, if you told somebody from the other parts of California or from Canada, you were, like from California, they always thought it had to either be San Francisco or Hollywood, and particularly Hollywood. Everybody had that idea, and it's, like Beach Babylon. It's, we either out surfing or we got a party going.
Mm-hmm.
And the Central Valley is essentially Missouri West. That's what it really is. It's the same people, it's the same religion, it's the same mindset, like God bless them, but that's really what it was. And so it was a situation where in a place, in a small town like that, everybody that you can find, every little scrap, every little bit of information, every friend, every talented individual. Most of my friends, I was kind of like considered brilliant, young, precocious, which means you are ostracized by your peer group, get beaten a lot, and essentially, even a lot of the adults don't really care for you too much because it was a fairly anti-intellectual area.
Right.
This is just part of that belief system. There's good parts, there's bad points, but that's essentially what it was. So all of the oddballs find each other, and it's kind of nice because at least at that time, no one cares that someone is 20 years older, 30 years older, 40 years older, or 15 or 20 years younger. It's just that you share this thread of we're stuck here, we're different in some way. What can we do to get better at what our interest is, or to encourage each other?
Okay, and that's been kind of what's driven you a lot.
Oh, completely.
Absolutely.
That and diagnosed obsessive compulsive disorder.
I think there's a lot of people in this industry that are either diagnosed or non-diagnosed, but they got it.
Oh, this was I was brought into child psychiatrist by second grade.
Wow. Well, I'll spend a little time myself. So
the teachers got so upset because I would not be the normal version of, the Hollywood version of a disruptive student, throwing spitwads, throwing paper airplanes, like calling out. My problem was never the instructors. My problem was mostly the peer group, because when you're young and bright, the problem is that the people that you have something to talk about with, that you look up to, that you feel comfortable with, are at least 20 years your senior. Mm-hmm. But emotionally, you're less mature than the people you're around. Yeah. Genius is an imbalance, essentially. And when you're young and you don't know how to navigate it yet, it's horrible. And it's hell for your parents. It's hell for the teachers. One of the things that they would do to punish me would be to like, well, he's got a lot of pride in doing well on a test. So what we'll do is when I'm describing, how to take this test to the rest of the class, we'll punish him by putting him outside, then bringing him in, then teaching him a lesson about, like this is what happens when you disrupt and ask too many questions and don't let me, teach my lesson the way I want to. You didn't know the right, questions. You didn't have the information, and therefore you failed, and you deserve this embarrassment. I'd ace those tests, and the teachers were just furious.
I'm a dyslexic, so I had a hard time taking tests. So I was on the opposite of that spectrum. But I understand whether I'm in the league or not. I've always said that I'm amazed my parents survived me. So anyway,
how do we get there to adulthood? It's never easy.
We have a most wonderful relationship now, and I'm blessed by it. But
exactly.
All right, so tell us, I know you've given us a little bit, but how you actually got into the business. When did that happen, and how did that happen?
Oh, God only knows. It's one of those things where I think most of us just fall into this because it's such a small business. It's one of those things where I knew from the time I was really young. I remember talking to guidance counselors about wanting to do precisely what I do now, but there was no roadmap. And from the guidance counselors to the teachers to later the professors to my parents, they were all petrified. There's no work. There's no path to this.
Right.
So, so a lot of, and everyone loves to talk when they finally get there. Oh, it's all about hard work. It's all about me. And it's all about all the things that I did. No, it's also along with that hard work. And there's a ton of it, but it's all the opportunities you were given. It's all the people that helped you along the way.
Yep.
And sometimes, and I know this because I was mentored and tutored by people who were blindingly brilliant that never got that opportunity, that life got in the way.
We're going to talk about your mentors and that kind of thing here in a minute.
Yeah, we'll get to that later. But so basically, it was a situation for me where went to electronics school, went to college, took some engineering, essentially was a professional student through most of my 20s. Got out, worked for a number of corporations because there was just no other path, and I needed a job. And hated being a number, hated not meaning anything to upper management, certainly the owners, and clearly could see this isn't what I want to do. But it was also at the same time being a professional musician, and I just kind of assumed, well, I'll do this for money. And I'll do the music because that'll be the part that satisfies, my soul and what I really want to do. And I guess this is going to be the rest of my life. Always kind of like looking forward to, if there's some kind of opening where I could actually take my engineering skills and apply them the way I want to. And every once in a while, I'd get an opportunity to meet someone and be a ghost engineer for a small fledgling company. But those would kind of like go no place and so forth. And it was just one started attempt, a little bit of success, then failure, then a little bit of success, then failure. Finally, I got a job at a company called Firm & Sound. That was my longest place before AudioQuest. That was 16 years, 14 of which I was lead design engineer. And that I turned into an opportunity, but it didn't have to go that way because they were pro audio and broadcast. That was still a long ways from what I really specialize in. I started a custom install and home division there. And, I'm very grateful to them. They really, really gave me a lot of opportunities there I wouldn't have otherwise had.
We sold a lot of that Furman product until the AudioQuest stuff came along. So I certainly understand and really respected that. So when was your first time going, wow, as we all have? Do you remember it?
Yeah. Again, Visalia, California. I guess this would have been either the second or considered by some the third wave of the audiophile boom. This is the late 70s. And even in a relatively small town, I think at that time it would have been, about population of 70,000 or so. It already had 2 or 3 places in town that you could buy stereo. You had chains in the West Coast like Pacific Stereo. There were a couple of other, like stereo and TV and appliance stores that had been there for many years and so forth. But this little place in a very unassuming building that I think had probably been built for professionals or something like that, but long since abandoned. California Audio Systems started in the late 70s, and it was on one of our main drags in town. And I had saved up and needed a integrated amplifier. So from 3 different jobs I've been working since I was a small child and worked for my father's, like family business too. I had $200 or $300 to spend of my hard-earned money on a little integrated amp to flesh out a system I was putting together for the bedroom, and thought, oh, well, this place is new and interesting. Let's check that out. So I park my bicycle and I go into this place, and it's the area's first audio salon. Very, like a much smaller, less sophisticated version of what you're doing. And just would never have really made sense at that time for a town that size. And ultimately they went out of business within 5 years because it just couldn't, there wasn't that kind of a market there. But thank God they took the risk, because they gave me my start in many ways. I walked in there, again, on my bicycle, pimply 15-year-old kid. They should have just ignored me. But it was the middle of the summer. They were kind of dead that day. They thought, why not? We're bored. And they thought, well, what you're interested in is in this front room, but let me take you back to the back room. Let me play you something. And so, I got to hear the big system, that was tens of thousands of dollars, like in late 1970s money. I was introduced to get on the couch. You got to be right in the center, isosceles triangle, perfect seat, for what we're going to play you. They put down the needle, and I was destroyed for the rest of my life.
What song was it?
Because I was like about 15, and I'd already been studying music, for 3 or 4 years already. Already had the bug. I'd heard what I imagined were good systems, but nothing like this. It was the first time I realized, oh my God, you can close your eyes and picture where every single musician is supposed to be placed in this panorama that's almost laser focused.
Do you remember the song and the gear?
The gear would have been, I think, probably Gale loudspeakers. Okay. It was a WinLabs FM cartridge on a turntable that floated in water. I'm trying to remember the name. It probably was a Mayware or JH Labs unipivot arm. It would have been their own homemade cable, maybe some Fulton Gold as well. It would have been probably, I'm going to say, Audio Research Electronics.
Okay, awesome. What an amazing experience. Sounds like very similar to what most of us have had. And, it's just when we get that thing in that time where we just go, oh my gosh, I mean, it's so firmly planted in your head, it can't leave. And
I was ruined. I mean, it was just like, so you're sitting there thinking, this is transformative. I've got to have this. I sheepishly ask what the system costs. And then I'm running in my head, okay, I make this much for allowance. My 3 jobs pay this. By the time I'm 30, I can afford this.
If I spend no money on anything else, and live with mom forever.
Right. So what I figured out was the only way I could, quote unquote, have this system was if I worked there. I became their technician within a year.
Awesome. Well, let me get to telling us about a particular piece of music that moves you and why, and how did you find it?
It's not one particular piece of music. It's an album.
Okay.
Archie Shepp, 3 for a quarter, 2 for a dime on Impulse.
Wow, great album.
Now, the thing about this is that, again, incredibly small, sheltered community. I'm already in a situation when I discover this, I think I'm probably about 13 or 14, probably 13 years old. And the only place to buy records in town at that point is a couple of dime stores that have a little record department, brimming with maybe 200 records.
Right.
No one's got any musical knowledge. I've got a couple of private teachers, but they know symphonic music. They can speak to me with authority about Beethoven, Bach, Mozart, which I love and am studying. I was playing in symphonies by the time I was 16. I was timpanist in a local philharmonic. But the problem was that I was just intrinsically knew I was interested in improvised music. I knew I was interested in jazz, but the only exposure you could get at that point, if you didn't know somebody, there were no jazz clubs. There was no place to see music. There were a couple of people that once a year at a town picnic would play really watered down versions of Kid Ory, tunes, like traditional Dixieland. And a music teacher that would talk about, well, I can tell you a lot about Harry James and a little bit about Goodman. I played a couple of tunes by this modernist Dave Brubeck, and so people knew nothing. So again, finding anybody, just find any scrap of information. So for some bizarre reason, probably just, a local distributor that was trying to get rid of this album that they could not sell, that showed up in one of these bargain basement bins in this dime store. And I just looked at it. They were African Americans. I knew that it was their music. I knew I wanted to hear combo jazz. I only ever heard big bands on the television. That was not for me. I wanted what I felt was the real deal. And I heard this stuff, and it was just two bass players, Archie Shepp screaming the bell off the horn, Beaver Harris on drums. I would, get on a borrowed kit from school, spend late nights, practicing to try to sound with no lessons, just like Beaver Harris, because I was taking classical lessons. And I remember 2 years later, the tryout for the high school jazz band, there's Sammy Nistico transcriptions of Michael Jackson tunes. This is pop. They're looking for somebody that can basically do a basic, like rock beat. Boom, boom, bap, boom, boom, bap, boom, bap, digga, 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 crash, crash. I'm playing like a free jazz drummer, like when they get me up, and like everyone's eyes are bugging out. They think I've lost my mind. Clearly, I didn't pass the audition.
That is just
I
awesome.
learned later. I went to jazz school later.
Hey, listen, we will add your album, Chris, if you don't mind putting that album on the playlist. And you know, finding again, if I could ask y'all to like and subscribe to our channel, as again, it helps with our search and also gives you an idea when a new YouTube is going up from us. We have quite a few things that we're doing in that regard. Also, if you go to hifibuys.com and sign up for our newsletter, we sure would love it. It'll keep you informed of what's going on. I think you'll love what we got going on out there. We won't bomb you with newsletter after newsletter, we promise. Also, we are open now from 11 to 4, Monday through Saturday. And so also I wanted to encourage everyone, Chris, if you will, put it up there, please, about asking questions. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask. We'll do a Q&A most likely at the end of this program. And you end up finding we're going to cover quite a bit of product here, and we're going to get to it here in just a second. So Garth, tell us a little bit about who is or are your mentors in this business and life.
Oh, there's so many, and it's unfair because if I tried to list them all, I would end up missing people. But again, there were so many people where I was talking earlier about giving that opportunity where people that had no business giving me the time of day, not only befriended me, not only gave me their time, but would show me things. One of the ones that's well known or somewhat well known in the industry is Doug Sachs, Mastering Lab and Sheffield Labs. And I got to know him through a neighbor and a brilliant design engineer, Bob Neal, who also lived in Visalia and in later years built a considerable amount and also modified a lot of the Mastering Lab equipment. Blindingly brilliant person, but relatively poor, took care of his family, worked for the phone company, and no one knows him. But he's like brilliant geniuses in every area. any major city and even minor counties and things like that that you go to, there's always that visual artist, there's always that engineer, there's always that dancer or musician or poet that is as good as anyone you've studied, and no one knows who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And there were also a number of broadcast engineers, like John Moline and a bunch of other people that would just, like essentially say, when I was, again, 14, 15 years old, late at night, a lot of these people, like some of them were married, some of them, like were divorced, a lot of them kind of like crusty and older. Their families had long since abandoned them. So they had time for a precocious kid late at night and on the weekends in the summer. And they just sort of like, kid, here's the oscilloscope, here's the signal generator, here's the distortion analyzer, here's the schematic, the parts bins over here. We're going to build a preamp. How are we going to do that? The schematic's there. Get going, kid. And it would just throw you in the deep end of the pool, and they had no patience. And it was learning not only the hard way, all these things, what they meant, how to do things.
Well, you also had guidance. I mean, after you'd kind of goof up, they'd give you guidance on why that is right or wrong or whatever. And
yeah, and it was, and basically, I mean, you'd be lucky if the first one didn't set on fire and blow up in your face.
Well, we've all had that happen.
It was learning the discipline that, it's the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours. Your first 10 designs are going to be junk. You're going to get good if you're determined, but it's going to be somewhere around your 50th design, your 100th design. By the time I was an adult and had opportunities, I already had a lot of those hours behind me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you very much for sharing that with us. One thing I wanted to do before I get into a little more of the business side of things, I see the gongs behind you, and you talked about yourself as a musician and that kind of thing. Can you give us a little bit of briefness on kind of that?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to be a professional musician from the very, very beginning. And I could have been very, very happy having that been my exclusive path. I was always interested in the engineering equally, but I could have made that the hobby, and I could have, been a professional musician. I never was really concerned about being famous. It wasn't the typical music story of the kid that wants to figure out how to meet women, not, figuring out how to be famous. The parents aren't paying enough attention to me, but one day all these people at the schoolyard will want to get to know me better because I'm going to be famous on stage. I could have cared less about any of that stuff. For me, it was always, how do I become an excellent player? The people I aspired to were players, were great composers, and they were odd. They were rare. They were the people that none of your friends knew about, that half the music teachers, either scorned or didn't necessarily know about. I was kind of ruined in that regard early. So
highly creative people.
Yeah. So what a lot of my private teachers explained to me was like, you're very talented, you're very good, you need to pursue this in life, but have a backup plan, which doesn't mean give this up. It means what they now call a blended career. Mm-hmm. Do both, and figure out a way to do both. You're damn good, but understand you're not going to be able to make a living doing the music you love. So it's hard.
So what was your favorite gig?
There's been a number of gigs that I've loved. There have just been a number of festivals I did in Europe. All, like multiple tours throughout Germany, big jazz festivals in Copenhagen, Denmark, all throughout Scandinavia, France, multiple, ones in Italy. And all of those were just so wonderful, great audiences, well received, playing with just insanely great players. So many of these players that I've had the opportunity to record with, to work with, were people in my teenage years, I imagine maybe getting the opportunity to perhaps just meet one day. I've worked with them. So wow. I'm really fortunate in that regard. On the other hand, most artists can tell you that the medium gigs you forget. The really great gigs you remember, but what I actually love as much as the great gigs are the really horrible ones. My favorite horrible one was one where the promoter told us there are a ton of people showing up. Everyone's real excited for you to be here. We'll meet your guarantee. It was a trio with a really great concert pianist. We've got an incredible piano for you. It's gonna be great. This was in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We get there. It's an out of tune spin-it piano. It's a rec room underneath an abortion clinic. It's it's kind of a white dreadlock, kind of like neo-hippie playing hacky sack with three of his friends that brought their djembes because they want to jam with us.
Wow. Wow. That's absolutely memorable.
And the best part was he was very charismatic and had lots of great stuff to say, because none of his friends had turned out. He made our guarantee, but none of them showed up. But I transcribed half of what he had to say, and those ended up being song titles for the next 4 years.
Wow. Wow. What fun. What a great experience for you to be able to get out and do all that and help you in your engineering end as well, because, you know, one helps the other, and we've seen that throughout these HiFi chats as well. So tell us about your path to AudioQuest.
Well, that happened because Bill Lowe had been told by all of his regional sales managers and all of his other vice presidents and numerous dealers and friends in the industry for multiple years, but maybe 15 years ago or 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you're in the cable business. As you know, like had been defined by companies like Monster when they were at their peak and before their headphone period. You know, like in this new business paradigm, this new marketing paradigm, if you're going to be in cables, you got to be in power. You know, where's your power products? We really need you to have power products. But Bill always felt like, I'm a scientist. I don't know that discipline. I don't want to just do something to do it. I won't come out with something if it isn't legitimately better, or at least better for the price. We have to justify being in the market, or we don't do it. And they were like, no, Bill, come on. You can just OEM it from somebody else, put your cable in, put some gold plating on, it'll be great. Nope, won't do it. So he got enough pressure. Finally, he asked, kind of like what I always like to call his Bill Lowe's ears. You know, one of his second in commands for almost going back to the first year of AudioQuest, Joe Harley. He's since retired, but good friend. And he did what nobody else would do. I don't think there's a magazine, I don't think there's a reviewer that's ever done this. This would have been probably at this point about 15, 20 years ago. He purchased or borrowed every power regenerator, every power conditioner on the face of this earth. If it came from Pro Audio, if it came from the information technology world, if it was audiophile, if it was a little garage operation, they brought it in. They listened to every one of them, because they wanted to figure out, you know, they wanted to learn and they wanted to see if they could OEM from something. But first they wanted to find who's legitimately the best, not what the magazines say is the best, what we determine to be that from our own empirical listening through our systems. Mm-hmm. And they had found most of them made the system worse. A few of them made the system better. And by far and away, their favorite was my original reference piece from Furman.
Yep, the 20.
And actually, the original one was just called the IT reference.
Okay.
And then that became the 20 and then the 20i. But they were all variations on the same thing. So eventually, they brought me in with the rest of the managers. The president at that time of AudioQuest knew our vice president of sales from prior relationships, small, incestuous, you know, like world that we're in, you know, this business. Yes. And they were throwing numbers up on the screen and had a great plan for OEMing Furman into AudioQuest, and then we'd put, you know, AudioQuest, you know, like cable in and so forth, and won't this be grand? Bill looked at the whole thing and said, the numbers don't make sense. Both of us out in the same field doesn't make sense. This isn't going to work. So he put the kibosh on the whole thing, made my bosses upset, and basically within 48 hours, the upshot of that was he had Joe Harley call me on the phone and say, do you want a job? We want you here. they saw that, like, we don't need this company, we need Garth. And I was like, no, I appreciate this. I'm so flattered. I'd love to work for you. You'd be a better fit because it's audiophile and that's what I'd like to do.
Right.
But I'm loyal. And they had just given me my start. They really were depending on me. I'd have never done that to them. In addition to that, I was very ensconced in the Bay Area music scene, and that's where Furman was. So it took 9 years for me to finally come. At that point, we'd been sold a couple of times. The new bosses, the new owners, it was real clear that I was never going to get to design anything new ever again. My little teeny part of their overall empire was, like a little pebble, and, like essentially a pebble in their shoe, like if I needed anything. So it was time to leave. And I'm so glad I did. Yep. Because despite the fact that I kind of didn't want to live in Southern California, the job is a dream job.
Well, I will tell you, there's an awful lot of people that work that are really great people that work at AudioQuest, and a lot of folks are obviously in the industry and don't work at AudioQuest anymore. There's still great performers out there and that kind of thing. It's a very good culture. And that's one of the things I've always noticed about it. Bill's done an amazing job. In that sense, what are the main reasons you feel like AudioQuest is who they are, not what they are?
Yeah. The whole thing about AudioQuest is that, for example, cables. Yes, I was hired to design power. That's all I imagined I would ever do. I would start their power division and I would shepherd it all the way through. I would design everything. I would help the marketing team. I would help the sales team. And if we grew it to the size we wanted it to be, that would be enough. And that was enough for me. That was enough for Bill Lowe. That was enough for everyone else. I had no designs on doing anything else. Plus, Bill had gotten a lot of assistance and listening help and so forth from Joe Harley, as I said. But in terms of the overall designs and so forth, with the exception of things like the Dragonfly, that's, like Gordon Rankin. Right. But other than that, everything else had been built, start to finish. And 30 to 35 years of him being the sole designer. That was his kitchen. I was going to stay out. Plus, this industry, it's small, and most of these companies are usually run and owned by, the original designer, and that's their thing. And they'll hire you, but usually the way it goes is that they don't really need your opinion about their designs or these great ideas you have. So you just stay away if you want to keep your job. They've got an ego and you respect it. You respect what they've accomplished. But Bill's different. He is ultra questioning. He's always intellectually curious. And he was very confident in what he did. But if someone's got a better idea, he'll listen. Mm-hmm. And, while I was, designing the Niagara equipment, it was a situation where we were going to, because of some of the requirements of the Niagara, we were going to need to do some refinements to the power cords. And I was designed from the time I was a kid. Those original mentors said, look, from the studio microphone to the loudspeaker and everything in between it, you need to be able to build all of this. You need to be able to design all of this. You'll specialize in life, but if you don't understand everything, you're going to be a weak engineer because everything affects everything else. Yep. That's how it's designed. So I had the ability to spend hours and hours and hours with him and Joe, learn what they did, figure out the science, the engineering behind it they didn't necessarily know. That not only affected Niagara, but when it was time to look at power cables, I had some ideas. And Bill and Joe said, well, the production's downstairs, grab whatever parts you need and see what you can whip together. So I made a cord that was intensely ugly and probably would have only been good for a few tries. It's all like aluminum foil for shields and wrapped together with PVC tape. This was just butt ugly. But the engineering behind it had things like our new GND technology, which is patented. It had the zero, characteristic impedance technology behind it. I used parts from the bottom of the line AudioQuest NRGZ along with DBS to make it. And I beat Wells' signature. Bill Lowe essentially made me his cable designing partner that day.
Awesome. That is absolutely
And
awesome.
that would have never happened most places I would have worked.
Well, I
It
know
would
the
have
one thing.
been-
The one thing that I've always enjoyed about AudioQuest is going up and down their line. You can hear a difference as you go up and down, and their story has always been all cable is loss, and it's a matter of trying to figure out how to have linear loss, and so that it's not a cable that's good at bass but not good at treble, or vice versa, and that kind of thing. Because then we wind up having to fill it in with other products to do the opposite of what that is, which is just once you start that chase, you never get out of it. I remember it very well. So the thing is, can you give us a little history of AudioQuest? I know you haven't been there since the beginning, but
Oh, I'm far from since the beginning. That's the thing. It goes back to 1980 and arguably even a little bit before that, because Bill was already, doing some tinkering before he made the company official. Because he'd been a dealer for a while and he was experimenting with cable at a time when there were only a few people messing around with this. And, he was definitely at the right place at the right time, but hired a lot of the right people and did a lot of hard work and took a lot of risks. And it paid off for him. But really, it was a situation where my perspective on the history is going to be different than the founder, Bill Lowe's. He'll be able to tell you the stories of where he started. He'll know the names of everything. He'll talk about the first times going around talking to dealers and some of the, the pivotal points where he learned certain things. My perspective on our history is different. Mine is the history of understanding the ideas and the tools that define one step to the next step to the next technological step. And then my first 2 or 3 years joining AudioQuest, not building anything yet, just doing research.
Yep.
And again, understanding, okay, this idea that you thought of, that Joe heard, I trust because I trust your hearing and I trust the science, but I don't understand why. With Bill, as a scientist, as long as you only did one variable at a time, philosophically, it was okay for him to put it out, not understanding it, because science, unlike some types of dogmatic engineering, it was okay to not understand why it was better. It was enough to just know that it is better.
Mm-hmm.
I don't come from that discipline.
Right.
I need to know why, and I can't sleep at night till I do. So I'm going to work on it and work on it and work on it and work on it till I figure this out. But the reason that discipline is valuable, because once you understand why, that can lead to the next 20 years of technologies that you'll be working on, and you'll get better and better and better and better. And so those are the parts of like our history that are interesting to me. It's understanding how he went through his progression of starting with wire, and then eventually coming to the conclusion, no, I'd be better off with a solid conductor. Experimenting with different types of insulation materials and understanding what these differences, mean. And, and that there isn't a dogmatic approach to it, because it depends on what kind of cable and how that's going to have an effect. And there isn't a universal answer to these things. Later on, the dielectric biasing that he worked on with Richard Vanderstein, and everything that was behind that. Their original thoughts for why they thought that might be an advantage, but they weren't entirely sure. The work that I did to prove, no, you're right, but it's not what you think it is. Here's what it is.
It must have been wonderful for you to walk into kind of what I'd call the AudioQuest playground with all the experience behind it, and then all the product and all the different wires and that kind of thing, for you to be able to just go to town. It must have been a real joy, especially coming from where you had designed the Elite 20 so many years ago and didn't really have a lot of ways to, go, I guess, outside of that and be able to try and take your world further. So it's a beautiful match. Obviously, your passion for it is amazing. I just can't imagine your first week at the job.
It was so, it was really, really, really great. It was just, but it's not even the first week. It's really the first couple of years, because what Bill told me was effectively, take all the time you need, but don't waste time. Every place I've ever worked, it's always been hop to it. Where's the new line? Where's the new product? We got a trade show coming.
Right.
You know, we got to get moving here. Marketing says we need this. You add a little bit of your magic to that, and we'll be good.
Well,
That's
quite
not
honestly.
what we make the best stuff. The
Yep.
best stuff comes from things people don't know they need yet, from
Well,
technologies they haven't imagined yet.
yep. In today's world as well, to go to a whole nother mark takes, I mean, there's a lot of smart people in this industry and some enormously passionate engineers and that kind of thing. And, you know, to really make a product of another level, what you've done is just, you know, it's not the easiest thing to do in this world.
It's not the easiest thing to do in this world, but it has to do with the fact that because this is equally important. I have a company that allows me to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I got a marketing team that knows how to explain this, and an education team that knows how to explain this. I got a sales team and with the distribution model that knows how to, you know, like sell and distribute this. We've got a production team that knows how to consistently manufacture this when it's not easy to do. Mm-hmm. It's the entire group, it's the entire chain. Because yep. Again, going way back to some of my mentors, there are a lot of people like me that can make a better mousetrap. They can design something wonderful, but it'll be for yourself and 3 buddies if you don't have the rest of it in place.
I totally agree. It takes a large culture to get across what y'all have done. So yep. I totally understand it. So we're going to start to talk about noise here in just a second, but I wanted to ask y'all to please like and subscribe to the channel there, the YouTube guys. Also, if you don't mind going to hifibuys.com and sign up for our newsletter. And I want to let everybody know we are open from 11 to 4, Monday through Saturday. Really excited to be that. We may adjust our hours even more widely as we get forward. We are having a lot of customers come in the door, and we're very thankful for that. So again, appreciate everyone's support. Also, when Chris, if you don't mind putting out there that we'll have, if you could just, where people can ask questions. This is a pretty in-deep subject, pretty in-depth, has a lot of depth to it. Sorry for my mumbling of words there. And also, I just want to ask y'all to please be careful out there and let's all take care of one another, okay? And so the thing that has just boggled my mind over the last bit is basically about noise. You know, I was finding this out through even, you know, some driver techniques and that kind of thing that different companies were doing, crossover techniques that different companies were doing, cabinet techniques that different companies were doing, an awful lot of things. And then your products came along, and I had this reference system in my store, which is still here, and it would not sound the same today, just absolutely not, without your products in it. I'm sure of that. So through the Niagara things, also the power cords, HRS systems, all this stuff has a thing to do with reducing noise in a system. So what I did not realize is how much fidelity I had in the gear, but how much noise was covering up, even though I thought I had an amazing system and so did everyone else. So it really allowed me and everyone else to kind of see a different picture, and your brain starts to relax when that noise gets out of it. And I've always related noise, and excuse me to those that have been on before that have heard this, about if you take a restaurant and you go into it and it has bad acoustics, and you know the ladies have been drinking the wine and the noise level gets way up, and you end up finding that you almost can't talk, you can't hear, your brain gets really, really busy. And then if you walk into another restaurant, you end up finding where the acoustics are good and, shall we say, the noise floor is much lower, your brain is much more comfortable and it's a lot easier to be there, and you can connect with the environment, which is kind of what we're doing with the stereo system. So when you kind of look at it in that way, it's just kind of something that just kind of overwhelmed me. And so let's talk a little bit about what is noise and kind of how do you say what it is? I know when I first got in the industry, it was like noise was this background shh. And that's that noise you were trying to get rid of. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a noise that's averaged over the sound by all the interference and stuff. So can you tell us a little bit about what that noise is and how do your products, in I don't know, layman's terms, take care of that?
Well, yeah, that hiss sound or the shh, you know, like that you hear, you know, in the background when you take, you know, like the volume you control and you put it all the way up. You know, like with, you know, like with everything in your system, you know, like turned on.
Right.
And particularly if it's phono based, because that's going to require the most amplification, therefore that's going to have the most noise. So, if you put that up, you're going to hear a little bit of hum in the background. You're going to hear definitely shh. That is the electronics, what's called self noise. That is intrinsic to your power supplies and into the circuits that you purchased. We can't really do much about that. Sometimes we can reduce a little bit of the buzz and hum slightly by feeding those power supplies cleaner power, but only a little bit.
Right.
Like for better or for worse, that's the signal to noise ratio. That's what that's technically called in most of those components, whatever they are. I can't change that. But this is a type of noise that's an insidious type of noise. It's the noise that's not part of the manufacturer's specification, because it's the noise that didn't exist necessarily in the same way when it was measured in a laboratory. Because what's measured in a laboratory with a DAC or a preamp or a phono preamp or a power amplifier or a turntable or a phono cartridge has only a little teeny bit, of relevance to what we're going to experience. Because when they measure these things, they do something that I consider to be criminally faulty. They don't measure the entire system with that component in it. Because as far as I'm concerned, that's the only thing that's valid, especially if you're looking at noise. Because it's how the system deals with the noise, from just as the people that mentored me, from the beginning of the chain to the end of the chain. Because if you're in a studio and you're listening through the monitors, through the monitor loudspeaker, and you've got a microphone out in, like the main performance room, the woofer of that loudspeaker is modulating that microphone. It's one circuit. Your system is one circuit, multiple circuits within, but it all is interconnected. So this is part of it. Why do you care about this insidious level of noise? Simple. Just like you were trying to explain to people, Alan, and I've measured this with differential tests in a laboratory, up to a third of your high resolution audio or high definition video is lost to what's called a masking effect, to this type of noise. And it's just exactly what you're talking about. You've got a great system. The system is so much better than you'd ever imagine that it really is. But this is a foundation level problem. It's a foundation level technology. The foundation is the power that gets to everything that's got a power cord attached to it. If you have noise that gets through, if the power supplies and all those components could get rid of 100% of it, you're good.
Right.
But it can't. Nothing does, no matter how good the electronics are. But particularly these days, because a lot of this noise is induced from cellular towers, satellite, Bluetooth. And the reason those new radio waves are so much more devastating to our pursuit than the old ones were that we all grew up with is because they're higher in frequency. When they're higher in frequency, that means the sine wave is smaller. That means that it can couple into your circuits much easier than it ever did before. And all the old school ways of getting rid of this induced radio noise, like a basic braided shield on your cable, twisted pair, a nice metal chassis around your electronics. At those new frequencies, dream on. They're not nearly good enough, not even close. You got to have new technologies to take care of this. And it's also what I learned over 20 years ago. It's not enough to just try to select a couple of frequencies that look good with your technology in the laboratory and say, oh my God, pat myself on the head. Look at what I did, 100 decibels down at this octave. Well, folks, there's over 23 octaves of noises that can do this to a system. Which one's the most important? How about all of them? So anything that I do, be it a cable, be it a power, conditioner, regenerator, whatever you want to call it, or anything else I'm trying to deal with where noise is concerned, I got to do my best to take care of all of those 23 octaves as best I can, as evenly as I can, consistently, or what an engineer would call linearly. Because if I don't, I've just revoiced the system. Some frequencies are going to be unmasked to this unmasked, to this unmasked, to this unmasked, to this unmasked for 23 octaves at the low signal level. At the loudest levels, I haven't affected anything.
Yep.
But where our resonances are, our harmonics, our stage width and depth, our fast transients, our extreme highs, all the stuff that makes your audio system engaging, real, and not, say, a boombox or, you know, like some little table radio. That's the ability to do what's 60 decibels down, 70 decibels down, 90 or more decibels down. Your system can do it. It was designed to do it. But you got to give it a fair fight. You got to give it a fighting chance. And that's what getting rid of that noise is about.
I think one of the things you talk about is, the linearity of, the reduction of noise matters as much as getting rid of the noise, because when we have a nonlinear system, and I look at this through all the things that I have, in my toolbox here, and that is to make sure that we don't have a system that kind of shows us the fault of one area of the system versus the greatness of the other area of the system. And that just makes us nitpick and figure out what's wrong with our system constantly. And there's another thing that does that as well that's not as involved with this, but and that can be gear that's a bit more analytical, stuff that can be really cranked up with feedback and so on and so forth, and really provide something that isn't real. And so it makes us kind of look at it in a different way. But again, this subject is about noise. So again, it is a revelation. I could not tell you, I have hundreds of people that have walked into the store and taken home a power cord and have gone home saying they will not buy it. And I will tell you that 99 out of 100 have bought it. So, and many of them have bought many, many more, and many of them have gone up the level, because what's funny is as you go farther up the levels, you get a larger reduction of noise. And even though you don't think it can do anything more, I'm telling you, I'll give you the opportunity, anybody out there that wants it, to have that opportunity to see what I'm talking about. If you don't hear or see any difference, I don't care. It's your system and your ears, but I know for a fact this is true. So,
yeah. And like there's a part of me that tends to be very, egalitarian. As I said, I'm a professional musician. Half my friends, at least, are professional musicians, improvisational jazz musicians. So that kind of usually corresponds with no money, but they all have great ears. They all love audio too, and would love the kind of gear that I almost take for granted, like shamelessly. And so, they're always just sort of like, okay, Garth, yeah, fine. I can't afford that. What do you have for me? And one of the things I love about AudioQuest is that I can provide them with things with great performance, like I'm also at a very reasonable cost. But, but to your point, Alan, it's one of those situations where it also is just, accepting the world we're in now and what's changed, and be able to understand, analyze it, and provide the tools that are necessary for it. Because I promise you, the things that I've created, like for AudioQuest, or I've created along with Bill, would not have been necessary when I started in this business at age 15.
Right.
1977, 1978, somewhere around there. No. And I know this because the guys I was apprenticing with, broadcast engineers have always been obsessed over this. They've always known better, but it was a different world. If I measured the AC line coming out of your wall in those days at a critical audio frequency like 3000 hertz, middle of female vocal, okay, like piano, everything else, okay, I wouldn't have seen a millivolt of noise, at that point. And it would have been there, but the noise would have been, the insidious noise would have been so low below your quietest audio signal, it would have been academic. Who cares outside of a laboratory? Today, if I measure an outlet anywhere near a server room at that frequency, typically around 3 volts. Now, most people aren't engineers and technicians that are listening to me, so let me quantify that for you. What comes out of your preamplifier at what's called 0 VU, the average output, or it comes out of your DAC, is less than a volt, 0.775. That means what's coming out of your wall is 3 times that. If your power supply actually is excellent, because if your power supply is inside those products, even without Niagara, even without our ports, if they weren't doing their job, you wouldn't have what's called the signal to noise ratio. You'd have a noise to signal ratio.
Signal ratio. Yeah.
It would be, like masking everything.
So I have a question for you, and this is kind of not even on our little list here, but it just kind of came up. First of all, I want to let everybody know that there is an app out there called Architecture of Radio. If you pull it up, I know I have it on my iPhone and I've showed it to many people. It can show you as you put it along the sky and also around you, every satellite tower, cell phone tower, not satellite tower, they don't make those on towers, every satellite up in the sky, and then all the cell towers that are around you, you will be absolutely blown away because your whole house system is sitting there as this huge antenna just grabbing all this stuff and just shoving it into your gear and into the sound you hear. But the other thing I wanted to ask you is that penetration into studios, we have all had, when you think about it, if I had as much reduction in noise in the production of the sound, then I would have a much better recording coming out of my stereo. Correct?
Correct.
So how have y'all done as far as, getting your cables and that kind of thing in studios and showing them, what's right?
It's a slow process. There's 2 things about this. We live in a world right now where recording studios are declaring bankruptcy. And I mean the classic top of the line ones. The middle priced ones, they've been gone for 10 to 20 years now. When the music industry changed, when all the downloading started prior to streaming, it became a situation where record companies all got, bought up and consolidated. Everybody got out of the business because the fear was they'd never make a dime again. Therefore, people don't have the budgets that they used to have. Therefore, they can't afford the studio time. Right. Of course, you've also got digital audio workstations at home where you've got professional audio that's tried to convince people for, essentially now 30 to 35 years that it's all zeros and ones, and your laptop and a cheap, simulator, bit of software is every bit as good as a $3 million studio. Well, it's not. And the Audio Engineering Society has made themselves go in that period of time from a bustling concern down to a convention with a few card tables because of their foolishness. But basically what, all of this is a, situation where because of all those biases and prejudices, it's hard to get any but the very best of the best to go along with this. The very best studios have embraced this. They do have things that I've made when I was with Furman. They do have, some of the AudioQuest stuff. Kevin Gray mastering, which is responsible for Music Matters. Now, the Tone Poet series from Blue Note. Yep. Those all come out of, Kevin Gray, as well as a lot of the other audiophile things as well. That's all AudioQuest cable.
Well, it is amazing to me when you think about that, we only got half of it here. And when we look at the other half and you put those 2 halves together, what kind of, wow. So anyway, great job for y'all to be able to get your products in there. So, so before we get too much into the product range, tell me what sets AudioQuest apart from the crowded kind of cable world, line conditioner product world, that kind of thing.
Well,
you kind of explained it, but
it depends on this perspective, because in a certain way, I don't know, it's seemingly crowded, yes, in terms of dollars, if we look at like a small market. But on the other hand, the way I always look at this, particularly say where power is concerned, because that's what I'm primarily known for. And I don't consider competitors like Shinyata, PS Audio, Transparent, Isotech, Taurus, to be competitors. I consider those constituents worthy ones that make a damn good product. I consider my competitor to be a $20 strip and a wall outlet, and someone that doesn't understand that they could do a whole lot better than that. Right. That's the low-hanging fruit.
And for not a lot more money.
Arguing over this tiny, tiny, tiny slice of a microscopic pie when we need to not be fighting with each other and look at the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's pretty eye-opening, at least should be for a lot of people. I know it is for me. And so I guess, you know, when you talk about that, it's a very good intro into the PowerQuest products, because this is really your most reasonable products. They sell in the $200-300 range, and shall we say, do actually an amazing difference in what we see out there. So tell us a little about PowerQuest 2 and 3, and what are the differences between those?
Well, you know, part of Bill's idea from the very moment that I started was to have, you know, things at a reasonable price range, that were, you know, like in kind of like more the economic sweet spot. In
Right.
fact, his original idea was for us to make something more akin to the PowerQuest 2 or 3 to start out with. I argued vehemently and got the Niagara
And one.
7000. I kind of almost threatened to walk. You know, I mean, just we did that good-heartedly. I mean, we love each other, but it was a situation where he knew where the market was, and he was right. At the same time, what I knew is that we had, as AudioQuest, despite my background, no background in power, therefore had established no credibility. And I had seen what happens when companies start, you know, like with something that's very good and it's a good value, but you start at the bottom and then you try to go into the top. It's always considered by people that you're beyond your station, you know, like stick with what you do, you know, like, so no, it was, I'm a top-down designer. But and essentially a 2 and a 3 is a lot of the technology that I designed for Niagara, it's circuits that you see schematically, variations at least, in a Niagara 1200, and in some cases in a Niagara 5000. It's just that we've gotten rid of some of the technologies that we can't afford, some of which will not fit into a PQ2 and 3. And then the biggest difference, it's what would happen if you took all this research and development that I did, you took really well-honed, listened to, not just tested, listened all the way along for every part of the circuit. If you put those into something that you can manufacture affordably and at scale, that's what PowerQuest is, because there's going to be more PowerQuest pieces in the future. But whether it's a component PowerQuest or whether it's a, you know, like a smaller power bar, or, you know, like something that's portable, it's always about something that you can manufacture at scale. Niagara is about hand built. It's about small batches. It's about, you might need to wait for this. It's about dozens of parts that are custom manufactured for us that we have to bring to Irvine, and that I have to test, you know, each batch. I have to burn them in on our machine. We have to, you know, grade and, you know, like label them. It's a lot of work. It's certain things we do for Niagara that are so irresponsible on a conventional manufacturing basis that most places I've ever worked for would have fired me for suggesting it. But that's who I work for.
Well, I remember
is incredible in that regard.
I remember being at a CES in one of your demonstration rooms, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years ago, when we actually went to shows. And watching you turn just the direction of a single, I think, ground wire,
Yeah.
and just the difference that made. And it seems, I mean, and I was in a room full of people, and we were all kind of in the same, like, wow, this has got to be nuts. And it is. But, you know, that's what extreme passionate engineering is. And thank you for your contribution to that.
And I know my point too is that you heard 3 inches. A typical power conditioner regenerator probably has somewhere between 20 to 40 feet of wire in it. Calculate the transient intermodulation distortion you heard, which is primarily what you were listening to on ground of AC, and multiply that, because that's what's about to happen.
Wow. Wow. Amazing when you think of it. You know, we have hooked these things up, my own computer that I have right here. I have one of the PowerQuest products hooked up to. It's speeded up, color got better, everything. I mean, just amazing the change in just this computer. Now, this is a big iMac that's, powerful and capable and got a huge screen on it and that kind of thing. By the way, I just love this thing. And, but I will tell you that it changed it. We've done it with projectors, shall we say, TVs hanging on the wall, those kinds of things. And it's just absolutely amazing the difference that it can be made. This noise feeds everything you plug into your house. So if you think that you have something that you would like at a little better level, you end up finding that these the PowerQuest and Niagara products can absolutely take that to another level. So anyway, it surprised me, because after I did my experience in the other systems in the store, and I literally have Niagaras and your power cords from pretty much from gosh, I can't even think of the name of them right now, but the next level of tornado and that kind of storm series. Thank you. Basically in every system, and that's 15 to 20 systems down here that we have those cables in. Yes, it's a ton of money to put in this stuff, but I don't mind saying it's worth it every bit. And I did have to buy all those cables, so I don't want anybody thinking y'all gave them to me just so I could say that. So let's get on to Niagara. Niagara has been extraordinarily successful here. I don't mind saying most of the Elite 20s that I sold out of here have been replaced with a Niagara 5000 or 7000. Not that by any means that the Furman product is bad. It's just this literally is doing things at a different level and kind of with different purpose. And even though we plug all our stuff into all of them, so it just is different. So let's start out with a 1200, and if you can, kind of work me from there to the 3000, which is relatively new, and then to the 5000 and the 7000. And what do we gain as we go through those?
The whole thing is again, like what I was talking about before, it's what I can do to optimize, what I consider to be a bad situation with the insidious noise that comes in, and then also for power amplifiers, make sure that they've got the lowest impedance going to their power supply as possible. Power amplifiers are unique amongst everything else in an audio video system, because they're the only thing that you'll ever own that's got what's called a variable power supply. Everything else, once it turns on, within a second or two, once it goes into conduction, it pulls the same amount of current from the wall from now till doomsday, as long as it's turned on. A power amplifier is different. Its current demands modulate with the audio demands and the volume you're playing and the speaker that you're loading that into. That's critical, because that means that for that amplifier to work at full efficiency, you've got to constantly be supplying transient current to that power amplifier. This is one of the Achilles heels of every isolation transformer based power conditioner, every power regenerator, most of the power conditioners. Yes, a lot of them have so-called high current outlets, but very few of them do anything to fix the problem. This is like one of the things that I've been working on for years, because it's a matter of like what is that power supply of the power amplifier going to need to have that. So those are the two things I'm primarily concerned with. And the more you advance up the line, the more I can do. But everything is the same philosophy. It's how much of the 23 octaves of noise can I reduce that noise linearly, and how much of it can I do so? How much can I address the noise that's on ground that most products of this ilk do nothing about, and do this properly? Almost as an afterthought, although it's actually very critical that we do so, can I protect the equipment that's connected to this in a way that's substantial and real, non-sacrificial surge suppression that's not invasive to the audio circuit?
What do you mean by non-sacrificials? For those of us that are out there that don't know what that means, explain that.
That means that you can go out and purchase a so-called surge strip, probably for 20 bucks. And it'll be, Underwriters Laboratory rated, and, and some of them even have a guarantee or warranty for connected equipment, because this company that sold this thing to you for $20 or $50 can't wait. They've got people standing by to write you a check for $50,000 or $1 million, because you're special. They love you, and they want to make sure you have a good day and that they've sent you a check.
Yes.
You will never collect from these people.
Right.
And it's 2-point print that will keep them from doing so. Some people do a little teeny bit, but mostly that's nonsense.
A lot of times after your homeowners, you might fight them for 5 years and get your deductible.
Yeah. So the whole thing is that these circuits are ostensibly about protection, but at best, they give up their life in order to hopefully protect, from an AC surge that comes through. Unfortunately, the technology that they use is so out of date and so questionable in terms of the sophistication of today's DAC and video components and a lot of other things we've got. If you've got surface mount chips, most of these are 3-mode devices. They send spikes and surges directly to ground every time something turns on or turns off, dozens and hundreds of times a day. Forget a lightning storm. This is the microsurges that hit every day. And so the problem with the average surge suppression 3-mode that most everybody else uses is they're actually creating pits and fissures and actually damaging your equipment just a little teeny bit microscopically every day, to the point where if you get 2 flat screens or 2 DACs, sequential serial number, keep one of them in the box, put the other one in service. If you put the other one in service and you plug it into a 3-mode, like a surge suppression device or the wall, 5 years later, if you live in an area that doesn't have really bad lightning storms, the truth of the matter is it'll probably still boot up. You'll even think it sounds pretty good or looks pretty good. Well, take its partner 5 years later out of the box and compare them. They're not in the same universe because it's been just performance that's been slowly, microscopically, very gradually going down. This is the stuff that I can't allow. So there's no ground contamination, and the non-sacrificial surge suppression means that it's set it and forget it. Anything that could hurt its, surge suppression devices would essentially be so high, over 6,000 volts, 3,000 amps, your electrical panel would melt and your building's on fire. At that point, the AudioQuest is your least of your problems.
Right. So in very simple terms, sacrificial means that basically it will take itself out. Okay. Non-sacrificial means that it is actually much healthier for the system. And also at the same time, if something bad happens, it's in almost all cases going to survive. And that means that you don't have to look at buying another one. You don't have to do any of that. Plus, you're going to get a much better sound from it, and it's going to keep all that ground problems from being in your system.
Yeah, it does what it does. And the other thing that I worked very hard on, beyond what I was able to do when I was at Furman, is making sure that I'm getting that level of protection, and at the same time, I'm not impacting the sound, because some of the circuits that you use in order to get that level of technology can have a deleterious effect on the sound quality or your filter. So it's working, yeah, or creating its own type of noise. So like resonant peaks within the noise, like a reduction or the noise dissipation. So it's always chasing your tail and trying to get the best overall results. But with the Niagara line, as you move up, you get, like more bandwidth noise reduction, more ground noise. Then you move up to the 3000 from the 1200. You've got our transit power correction, which gives you a current reservoir up to 25 milliseconds for the amplifier. Basically, it's making that power amplifier's power supply work more efficiently, and therefore you've got a better amplifier that just sounds faster, more dynamic, beefier, better control, better bottom end, because when you listen to an amplifier, you're listening to its power supply. Move to the 5000, more still, 7000, everything I know how to do. But it's all the same philosophy. It's a top-down philosophy. It's never, so many manufacturers and the way so many things are made these days, it's kind of like, exotic parts. And if a part has all of this audio goodness, we're just going to throw that and just plaster that everywhere, have that be our marketing campaign, and that's what we're going to do. And I've even had to not argue, but just, have like intellectual debates, like a little bit at at AudioQuest because people get used to a story and they want to continue it. And my attitude is no, these are tools. These ideas, these technologies, and these parts and these technologies are tools. You put the right tool in the right place. What works well over here may not work over here. It's the best overall result. That needs to be the overriding philosophy, not, what we're about is perfect surface conductors. What we're about is DBS. What we're about is ground noise dissipation. What we're about is zero cable technology. 10 years ago, I hope I'm talented enough that I'm not talking about half those things anymore. There'll be a bunch of new technologies and a bunch of new, buzz terms and marketing terms for those things. It's the overriding philosophy of technology that serves the ultimate goal, not about names, not about ingredients.
We are as guys, we get stuck on these little three-letter acronyms. It's the way our brains think, and once we get stuck on one, we kind of go down that path and look at everything that has that kind of thing, and then we figure out which one of those we want. And sometimes we limit ourselves out of buying the best product for what works for us because of that. I know that I am guilty. And have been probably certainly for many years within my 35, 36 years in this industry. So just to give you all an idea, the Niagara line from the 1200, 3000, to 5000 to the 7000 starts at $995. The 3000, basically we add a lot of power reserve, helps your amplifier sound a lot better. That unit sells right at $3,000. And then we have the 5000, which sells, I believe, at 5,000, and then the 7000 at 9,500. So anyway, I believe I've got all that right. So
I think the 5,000 is 5,500, but I could be wrong.
Again, my apologies. But you end up finding just some of the best value stuff. You couple one of these things up with a power cord that plugs into it, you will find an amazing difference in your sound system. If you start adding power cords from that box to the other things, you will be amazed as to the additional difference that you get from that. So one of the biggest questions I get is if I'm taking this power line that isn't supposed to make any difference from the outlet to the Niagara, and yet it does make a difference, why in the world should I need to invest in more power cords from the Niagara to my gear?
Okay, so I always consider the most important power cord in your entire system to be the one that feeds the Niagara. And for two reasons. One, because I ideally would have that Niagara feeding a power amplifier as well as everything else. Now, where the power amplifier is concerned, I need to make sure that I am not current constricting or current compressing in any way, shape, or form. I have technology inside the Niagara to deal with that, the transient power correction we were talking about, but I also want to make sure that I've got the lowest resistance in that cable, and I've got a topology or a design that doesn't current constrict the way many will. People will argue, well, gee, I've got, like about 40 yards of, like a very inexpensive cable going back to my, circuit breaker box. Right. That's certainly not AudioQuest, but what about that? Well, there's a couple things about that. First of all, that cord, more often than not, is actually not bad. It's usually solid conductor and it's fairly simple. Most of the cords that come with your product are usually a fraction of that gauge, and they're usually stranded. And it's usually a topology that has a lot more current compression in it than what's in your wall. What's in your wall is actually not bad. But the other thing is that you have ground noise dissipation in everything from PowerQuest 2 on up to the Niagara 7000. In that technology, I'm depending on that cord that feeds them to drain the excess noise back to your outlet and ultimately back to earth ground. Awesome. If we use somebody else's cable, if we use a stock cable from China, that's not going to work. The noise is going to back up into the Niagara and we've got problems. So that's why that cable is so important. Now, why do the cables on the other end of it, like Niagara, feeding your components make a difference? Fair enough. I spent all this money on a Niagara or PowerQuest. Why the world does this make a difference? Well, again, it's because if we look at the signal that comes out of a cell tower, like at somewhere around 500 megahertz, that sine wave is so small. The sine wave that comes out of a double bass goes from one side, if it's open E, it goes from one side of your, like of your kitchen or your living room practically to the next. If we listen to the so-called highest frequency that most humans can hear, around 20,000 hertz, that's controversial, but let's say that that's true. That's about 3/4 of an inch, about around 12 millimeters or so. Okay, 500 megahertz, that sine wave, I could put that sine wave, put about 200 of them end to end and fit them on the edge of this Post-it note. So a meter long, 2 meter long power cord going from the Niagara to your component might as well be a mile to noise like that. It's still an antenna. And also, because we've got noise dissipation technologies, because we've got ground noise dissipation, we have the ability to attract the noise off of your chassis, off of your common ground, back out of your component where it can do damage to your signal and do this and bring it back to the Niagara. It's a drainage system. If you live in an area with rain, do you have a flat roof? No, you do not. You have a pitched roof. And you've got gutters, and the gutters go down, like to a spigot and to, like another thing that ultimately goes out to your sewer or to a river or to a lake or tributary, right? Well, what happens when, like a part of the gutter to your rain ducts has a bunch of leaves and rocks in it? Now your drain system doesn't work. Now you're doing damage to your valuable home. Noise dissipation works the same way. It's like a tree with, with limbs back to the trunk. The whole thing is a continuous path.
I'm sorry, my little dog HiFi is in the crate behind me and he's getting all excited about something. I'll get somebody to get in here and get him out of here. All right, let's see. So, I've always been amazed at, again, the progression as you go through that. And it has always, again, been amazing to me and the folks that have done it. The thing that I know is when we go to shows, not these days, but previous and soon, we see so much AudioQuest Niagara and their power cords out there. Why do you think that is? I know, but.
I'm going to hope that the reason is it works. Because when you're in the position that they're in, everyone wants to be your friend. Everyone would be happy to loan you their wares, and they can, use anything that they like. Some people have alliances with other manufacturers and so forth. And so I understand that. And there are going to be certain audio reviewers, there are going to be certain booths where it's going to be somebody else's, work sometimes because that's a friend or that's a manufacturer that has an alliance with them. And I'm perfectly fine with that. That these days, a plurality of either manufacturers or different dealers are embracing what we have to offer. I'm flattered. I'm pleased. It could be different tomorrow, but again, as I kind of mentioned much earlier, I see all of us essentially in the same boat. The more we educate, the more we make the public understand what the real problems are and what the benefits are, all ships will rise.
Yep. And what's amazing is when you take the technologies that you have here, and then we look at the technologies of circuit boards, capacitors, all these other things that are out there, that's how we keep rising and rising and rising. I used to always think, the system just can't get any better. And I don't think that that's ever true anymore. And I think that's, one of the things, and that's part of the reason I realize I have limited funds to put in my system. So what I try to do is create as linear and few noise, the lesser noise that's in the system, the more fidelity I get. And therefore I find little need for me to do any upgrades because I've got a good, wholesome, quality foundation of a system. And that's really all that matters to enjoy the music.
That's exactly right, Alan. And the other side of it that I've, told people for a few years now is that, and even, in terms of the whole hierarchy of what do I, what's my next modification? What's my next thing that I purchase? What's the next opportunity to bring my system flowers, so to speak? Bill Lowe likes to say that. So, what's the most important thing I can change in my system? Well, obviously I have my biases because I see power as being the foundation, But the thing is that it in a sense, it's no more important to me than upgrading the loudspeakers, upgrading the amplifier. If I'm running phono, upgrading the phono cartridge or the tone arm. If I'm running, digital-based system, upgrading the DAC. But the thing is that if you haven't first addressed the fundamentals of your system, which are the acoustics of the room, because everything's going to deal with that, and the power, because everything with a power cord is going to have to negotiate that, and you have to deal with the noise and the current. If you haven't dealt with your foundation first, you're always going to be getting more through your upgrade. You're going to be getting more with the signal that's left over. Because once the signal's gone, it's gone for good. So to your point, Alan, if you get the foundation first, you're on such a good footing that you're going to enjoy the system regardless. From there, it's just a question of, like, how much further can I go? I'm excited by this new idea, this new component. I'm bored. I want to discover my music again, and that's fine.
Yep. It's all in everybody's place. The thing that I end up finding is, Chris from the background there is telling me that a lot of people have been commenting free HiFi. So HiFi is now free. And, anyway, who doesn't love a HiFi? He's a great little dog. He celebrated his birthday last Friday, July 3rd, mine as well. And anyway, it was a great time up in the mountains. He had his little hat on and all that kind of stuff. And we gave him a birthday cake. So anyway, I'll put a picture of that out on my Facebook page here sometime soon. But anyway, thanks for y'all. That's really funny stuff. So, all right. So we're going to talk about power cords and their effect on noise in the system. I know that we've touched on this a bit, but I want people to really get an understanding of the foundation. We know that the Niagaras is really about a drain system. Using the water analogy with the roof and the rain and that kind of thing is just an incredibly great way to put it. And I know the power cords kind of do the same thing in that regard. So let's talk a little bit about them. I know that we start with basically in the line, the NRG Y2 and Y3. I know there's a Z in there as well, but to not make it so complicated, let's talk about that first.
Well, essentially, it's like going up the PowerQuest and the Niagara line. It's the same thing, because, it kind of comes down to, you're going to have some applications that are going to require a power cord that can handle more current capacity. For example, if I'm selecting a cord to feed a Niagara, the PowerQuest come with an AudioQuest cord, but the other ones, the Niagaras do not. So I'm going to need at least an NRG Z or Z or above to have enough current handling capacity for the Niagara 1200 or 3000. And if I've got a Niagara 5000 or 7000, which is 20 amps RMS or average capacity, I'm going to, need to start with Mistral or Monsoon and work my way up the progression. In terms of working up the progression from there, then you have other considerations with NRG and with effectively the Storm series, or is it the Wind series? Excuse me, the Wind series.
Yes.
It's a question there of sometimes I have concerns with ergonomics. I need to put a component into a cabinet, into a very tight space. It's very little space behind the component, and I need a cable that can plug in and make a radical turn gracefully pretty quickly. I've only got 2 or 3 inches to do it. In a situation like that, something like a Wind series is a good idea. I've got a Vandersteen or a Vandersteen subwoofer. It's got a power cord that goes to it. I need something that's as subtractive as possible. I'm trying to still keep the living room, as nice looking as possible, make the cables as depth as possible. In a situation like that, we've got very, sophisticated, very good cables in that, line that are excellent from the Hurricane to the Silver Cloud. So there's that. Then when we've got, the all out, system where it's all about the performance, we've got, the Mythical Creatures, cables going all the way from, like Thunder all the way up to Dragon. But with all of these, it's always, in terms of performance, a matter of the more you spend, it's just a linear progression of it just gets better and better and better and better. And what it's getting better at is noise, like reduction or noise dissipation, primarily over an even wider and wider array of frequencies.
So I think
And
one of the things that happens, out there, and I know that when I was early in on this game, it was like, well, that's not going to make that much of a difference. Y'all got these special ears and you have all this experience. Well, yeah, that's true. But, you can hear this difference pretty easily. And I know I've been surprised. Many customers have been surprised. Other guys that work here and that kind of thing have been very surprised at the differences between one level to the next level. And I mean, it's truly mind-boggling. How does that happen? Because you have this wire.
It happens because I can't say that this will never happen in my career, but I'm pretty much allowed carte blanche to do what I want to do on a technological end. And then from there, Bill O determines what it's going to look like and what it's going to sell for. Okay. And then we work with the marketing teams and sales teams to kind of figure out where it'll place in the series and how we'll get the message out. But in terms of getting back to design, so many designers, so many engineers will just self-edit. It's not even a question of a corporation saying, you can't do this, I don't want you to do this. A lot of that goes on, but also after a certain point, you're just sort of like, I just don't even want to have this fight anymore. I just know from experience they're going to say no to this, they're going to say no to this. So you're not allowed to do certain things. So that's one of the things, is that there's very little that I'm not allowed to at least try. That helps a lot. And it's really idyllic if you're somebody that's very passionate about the products that they design. So that's number one, because everybody in the industry kind of talks about, particularly in their marketing, like at such and such corporation, our components are about a representation, a statement of the finest products that have ever been known to man. Our products, represent the finest ingredients with the finest technology and the finest craftsmanship, you could ever possibly hope to, earn. It's a crowning achievement that we're so proud to bestow upon you. Everybody talks about that. Those are easy words, but the reality of it is that not so often are you allowed to do this. But there are plenty of people in our industry that actually are small and are sometimes single owner engineer, and actually for a price are allowed to do whatever they want. So here's the other difference. Because of where I came from and the fact that when I was at Furman, I was the only audiophile, and I was given hell for it, because what a lot of people don't know is that people in broadcast and pro audio hate audiophiles. We are the scum of the earth. We believe in nonsense. And we're just like a bunch of like tinfoil hat people, that they just scorn. Never mind the fact that, I could prove everything that I was doing with instruments. They knew what they knew, whatever. So the thing is that I learned early that upper management was never going to say yes to anything I came up with if it didn't hit you over the head with how big of a difference it just made. My test for anything that I come up with for a new technology or new idea, I should be able to turn on the reference system, open up the door, have the receptionist, who is never going to be an audiophile and doesn't care, stand outside the open door and tell the difference between what I just created and taking it away. If they can't do it instantly and not hedge, I failed.
That's awesome. That's a great way. I've always used the expression, my grandmother could hear it. So I used that when she was alive. I can't use it anymore, but it is amazing. I always tell everybody, if you don't hear a difference, don't buy it. So kind of makes it a lot easier. But so I guess as you go up the line, though, you're getting heavier gauge materials, you're getting larger insulators, you're getting more shield, that kind of thing.
Actually, here's here's a little, like bit of interest in the mythical creature division of the power chords, for example, going
Yes.
from the thunder up to the dragon,
Right.
where you're going from, depending on the length, let's just say somewhere around $750, $800 for a couple of meters at retail, all the way up to, God, what is it? Like $6,000.
Yep.
You know,
For a dragon.
for a high current dragon. And every step along the way, the topology, which is just a fancy way for the insulation materials, the number of noise dissipation layers and shields and carbon and everything else like that, they're almost identical.
Okay.
Literally, the difference as you move up that line is the quality of the DBS module, and mostly it's the quality of the conductor, but not just the primary conductors used for ground, line, and neutral, but also even the conductors that drain, that are those skinny drains in the shielding, 100% shielding material. All of those things matter.
It's just mind-boggling to me. I mean, I just, and I do know that when you're building a system, it's a whole bunch of little things that you do that make a big difference, and that's kind of what you're doing chord by chord by chord.
Yeah, so, because the best conductor material is pure silver. It is the kind we use, and the way it's processed and annealed is insanely expensive. All done in small batches, again, which makes it insanely expensive. And again, the egalitarian part of me, with my friends that don't have a lot of money, although I know I make my living from this, I wish silver didn't work as well as it did. I would love to tell my buddies, look, this is for people with more money than sense. You get this one with perfect surface copper or long grain copper. It's got all the rest of, like my technologies in it. It's like 99% there. This is for people who are foolish. I wish I could say that. I wish in some ways the dragon wasn't as good as it is, but damn it. Every time, like I go from even Firebird to dragon, it's just sort of like,
yep.
Yeah, it just.
One of the myths out there is, well, in my system, silver doesn't work. What would you say to that?
It's a fair statement based on the fact that of the way that a lot of that material has been employed by other people.
Yep.
Are we talking about perfect surface silver? Are we talking about somebody else's silver? Are we talking about a silver alloy? Are we talking about silver plate? Because a lot of stuff that's out there where people will just throw out, it's silver, they're listening to silver plate. They're listening to silver plate with some cables out there that are tens of thousands of dollars per meter. And these things are not all created equal. Now, again, it's a question of application. There are some instances where silver plate is excellent. I love it as the primary conductor in a lot of digital cables. If it's a speaker cable, I hate it. The phase and time smearing that's going to create is horrible. And the brightness, because of the transient intermodulation that's going to occur with the noise that's bombarding it, is going to make my fillings come loose.
Yep.
It's just horrible. So when people say things like this, I agree with them, but you have to put those biases or those prejudices in context.
Yep. It's kind of like metal dome tweeters.
Yeah. How'd you implement it?
And
you
no
fake it, or you can make it great. Are all in and dome tweeters bad? No. Are some of them bad? Yes. And again, this is the whole business of audiophiles. And I mean, again, for sales, for marketing, I get that we need an elevator pitch. I get that we need a similar story, an easy story. And I help our marketing department with that, because I get that what we're doing here is way over the top and never going to work the majority of the time. This is for the true believers and the uber enthusiasts. Thank you. It's fun for me, but I know that's not real most of the time. But It drives me crazy in this industry when people want to equate technology with parts and with simple technologies, to the point where they're ingredients.
Yep.
It's not the ingredients, it's how it was put together. It's the application, it's how successful you were with the whole thing.
Yep. It's the execution of those 1,000 little things. Did you make all the right choices?
Yep.
That's what truly high performance is. And it's true in any high performance. Take a camera, a race car, any of that kind of stuff. It's the exact same thing.
Yeah, it's like going to audio shows. And I mean, I started going as a teenager, and every year, it's a lot of great people, but there's also always that elevator ride with two nerds that are about to get in a fist fight over, what's better for an amplifier, solid state or valves?
Yep.
Show me the circuit.
Yep.
As an engineer, I can make either of those great, or I can make a mess out of them.
That's what I always tell everybody. Don't put all tubes in one camp and solid state and mini, because you end up finding you can have a horrible sounding amp in both and a really wonderful sounding amp in both. Yep. So it's how it's executed. It's kind of like a manual and automatic transmission. We're now at a place with automatic transmission in high performance cars where, right, a lot of people are leaning that direction, and there's proof of it in the sales. So, one thing that I think, and guys, we're getting a little bit closer here, just so you know, I hope I'm keeping your interest. I certainly is keeping mine. I wanted to ask y'all to like and subscribe to the channel out there if you don't mind. And again, HiFi is free, so y'all are good. Also, HiFiBuys.com. If you'll go there and sign up for our newsletter, we sure would appreciate it. Keep you informed of what we have going on out there. And again, I promise not to bomb you with a bunch of stuff constantly. I do want everybody, please, to be careful out there. Take care of one another, be kind to one another. We're all God's children, so let's all pay attention to each other in that way. Also, if you will, Chris, put out there, ask questions. Please, if y'all have questions that we haven't covered, we want your questions asked, because every time somebody asks me a question, I get to learn as well. And so it's something that's just great for all of us. So one of the things I want to find out a little bit about, or if you'll help explain, I've had my own way of explaining this, and that is about like perfect surface copper plus. What is that and why? So if you just have an extrusion, obviously that must be different than perfect surface copper. And then when you go to perfect surface copper plus, if you look at this stuff under a microscope, what do you see?
Okay, well, it's beyond a conventional microscope. You would have to, do a perfect diagonal cut, okay, and you'd have to be able to see through all of the layers. This would require a type of microscope that is incredibly rare, but it could be done, and it has been done. But the thing is essentially is this. People have talked forever about the purity of the copper, or the purity of the silver, whatever the material may be. And there is an importance to this, and that makes a difference, yes. But the big difference between all of these different arguments about this through the times is, it has just, in addition to that, it has just as much to do with not only the process by which it's been drawn, because, like wires start out as, like a fairly large rod, that's also cast. And then it goes through a machine and it's drawn. It's like hair coming out through your follicle in any, person or any animal. And in this process, you've got friction and you're creating imperfections, particularly along the outside surface, not necessarily the skin, but right underneath. That's an important point, because there's been lots of people that theorized, well, if I just take this conductor and we just polish the outside, we'll make something much better. It affects almost nothing. It's the crystal structure underneath, because if you've ever seen a cut of cast metal tends to be very porous. The last thing that in a way that you want for transmitting signal through, because that's going to be, particularly at high frequencies, moving at speed, that's resistance. And that's modulation. You'd like uniformity. The perfect surface system, that we work with, there's a annealing process, which is a chemical process that softens this wire and also softens the core, structure inside, to where you get it a lot closer to something that's uniform. You'll never really totally achieve that, but the more in which you do that, and the more in which you get a wire that, as it bends and it's worked into use, or it goes into the machines to be processed, that you're not creating even further fissures that create resistance. Now, this has a big effect on things like a high frequency digital cable because of the high frequency and the speed at which things are going through. This has some effect on an audio cable because low frequencies are currents that start in the center and work out. High frequencies start from the outside. And this is called the skin effect. We've known this in electronics since the 20s and 30s, since the beginning virtually of audio electronics. And they go along the outside. Well, one of the things that we found is that with a lot of these wire technologies, what people are mostly hearing is not the frequency bandwidth of these conductors. This is where so many cable manufacturers and so many of the doubters have concentrated their energy and have made a fundamental error. Because at audio frequencies, you could use baling wire. You could use a coat hanger. It won't be perfect, but it'll do 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz reasonably well. To get the square wave to 20, like kilohertz, that's 200 kilohertz sine wave. So really you need that for bandwidth. But even then, like bad wire will do that reasonably well. What people are mostly hearing is the induced noise modulating the original signal. So the problem with anything that's been drawn is that you're going to have all these serrations, a little like a steak knife. And you see this with horsehair, for example, in a bow that you use if you're a cellist or like a violinist or a bassist. As a percussionist, I use bows for bowing cymbals, bowing gongs behind me, and all kinds of other instruments, saws that I play. Well, the friction is caused by the rosin you put on, but the rosin stays in place, and part of that friction is that serration in the hair. Well, that serration is never perfect little, like jaggers up and down that surface. They lean at an angle. They lean at an angle because when they came out of the follicle, they were being pushed in one direction, just like when a wire is drawn.
So that's what creates the different sound and the direction of the spool of wire.
Correct. And this is what I spend part of every week of my life at AudioQuest, taking a 3 to 4 inch sample of every roll of wire that's about to be sent to our numerous factories, or the wire that's used for Niagara, and I listen to that sample and grade it.
So as I understand this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, as you extrude this wire, and that's probably the wrong thing, pull the wire, I guess is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You soften the wire or heat it slightly so that as it's coming out there, there's less resistance, so that just underneath the skin of that wire, you have a much more denser formation.
A little less resistance and a little less distortion modulation, a little, more uniformity at the highest frequencies. At base frequencies, you're not affecting a damn thing. But it's high frequencies, the very high frequencies, particularly for radio frequencies or digital frequencies, that are making so much of a difference there. And because of the fact that with physics, current always, even a parasitic signal or current, follows the path of least resistance. So that's a fundamental problem in electronics that we all deal with. People try to study superconductors and so forth. This is a fundamental thing. What we find is that the better the annealing process, the purer the wire that we work with, the less of that distortion that it has. But then also, to your point, Alan, if we can take whatever level of distortion we're going to have to put up with, and we can know that we're going to have this directionality problem, if we can point that drainage of noise in the direction that's going to do the least harm, say away from your component and towards the Niagara, or from your Niagara back to earth ground through your wall, we're going to do less harm. Do no harm is the moniker for AudioQuest.
So how do you achieve a perfect surface copper to plus?
It is literally simply a better grade of copper, or a more entailed, like a process with the annealing.
Okay. So
it takes more time and costs more.
Yep. Okay.
A little bit of oversimplification, but that's essentially it.
Well, I think that's just where we all want to be. If not, please ask a question, and I'm sure this man can handle it. So, we've kind of gotten through the cables and that kind of thing. I want to get into speaker wires here in just a minute, but can you please enlighten us a little bit about the factory? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, okay, so the thing is that there's actually two factories. There's one in Roosendaal, Netherlands, and then there's one in Irvine, California. So it depends on what part of the world. We wanted to make sure that we set up identical production factories for our custom cables to make sure that we serviced our customers as well as possible. The upper end parts grading for Niagara are all Irvine, California. But there's a number of things that just because we simply can't have enough workers, and sometimes for economy of scale, sometimes to get the very best machines, we also have manufacturing partners through China, a number of them through Taiwan.
Have y'all run into some difficulties with supplies as of late because of all this?
Everyone is, absolutely. Yep. Everyone is.
We have experienced it too.
Oh God, I mean, for Niagara, it's a constant, problem for me because, again, I was allowed to do what most companies wouldn't allow me to do. Most companies are worried about, what if you ever have a problem like this? If we have one supplier of a given part that goes down, we want 5 other that are ready to go so that we always meet our shipping date.
Not the same part.
Yeah, my problem is that there's only one manufacturer, not because I'm lazy, not because I don't want to find another manufacturer, but because this thing is done to my specs. 4 of those manufacturers told me when I explained how hard this was going to be to build, told me to take a flying leap. There's no amount of money that makes it worth it for us to do this. We finally talked one of them into doing it, and getting a replacement for them is going to be painful. So, like when they lose half their workers to COVID, a quarantine, you just have to accept, okay.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yep.
It only takes one out of hundreds of parts.
Yep. I have seen that. I've, we've seen some difficulties, and we're definitely starting to feel the heat in the audio video receiver land and some of the bigger amplifiers and that kind of thing as well. I think the closer and closer the stuff is to home and the more discrete parts they use, the little easier it is to kind of have it, I guess, be attainable. So, I've got a pair of Dragon buy wires here at the store on the big room with the 7s, and we've got Robin Hood and lots of other of the new wires that you've designed out there to run for speakers. So tell us a little bit about, you've got Zero and Bass and Robin Hood and William Tell and that kind of thing. Can you kind of expand a little bit on that and how you come up with the sound you get out of it? It's really something. So I'm kind of without words because I don't know how to even explain it.
Unfortunately, I'm standing on the shoulders of Bill Lowe and some of the work that he did with Joe Harley and some others. So I was given great tools to work with when it was my time to start looking at speaker cables. But again, my perspective, I mean, it's not that I want to be a one-hit wonder with everything's about noise, because it's not all about noise.
Right.
No, it's about the audio signal, it's about bandwidth, it's about everything. So noise is part of it, and making something that deals with the new generation of noise effectively and making sure that it does so as linearly as possible. So that's what some of these new technologies are about, that we took some of the old ideas and built upon them. But it's just as much about understanding some of these things. Now, again, the people that trained me, it wasn't enough to just, again, be a one trick pony, knowing about power supplies and knowing about power, or maybe just know about cables. I can build amplifiers all day long, valve or solid state. So it's understanding, well, what are their problems? Well, and also loudspeakers and crossovers. Richard Vandersteen has known me since I was 15 years old. Yep. So, and he can tell you, as a precocious little kid, I asked him a million questions till he was like ready to go run from me. I always admired the fact that they were bright questions. But the thing is that, but it was learn everything. So it's like, well, what are the problems between that interface? What's it want to see? Well, one of the classic problems is that a cable for transmission of audio frequencies, a cable in terms of dealing with noise, which most traditional power cables didn't even have any shielding, didn't try to address noise hardly at all. And for good reason, because if you go back 30, 40 years ago, what comes out of a power amplifier is what's called plus 20 dBu. It's 20 decibels. It's a lot louder than anything else in the rest of your system. So it was considered a signal that was so high and level that the signal would be so far above your noise floor, the noise floor was of no consequence. But when engineers that were bright made that assumption, it was a different period. So that was the first thing. We got to start addressing noise because we live in a different time. That was part of it. But also, what's been a challenge from the beginning is the impedance that comes out of your amplifier going into a loudspeaker is not the same. Now, you could have a valve amplifier and it could have a binding post that says 4 ohm tap, 8 ohm tap, 16 ohm tap. That's a fantasy. That's an approximation, and it's legitimately based on what the impedance that the output of those valves or vacuum tubes want to see based on the way that output transformer was designed. But what comes out of that amplifier is not 8 ohms. It's not 4 ohms. It's a fraction of an ohm. It has to be a fraction of an ohm, or you're going to have horrible power transmission. The loudspeaker might say nominal impedance 8 ohms or 4 ohms. Is it going to be 8 ohms and 4 ohms through most of its frequencies? No. It's going to look like a roller coaster of different impedances that vary all over the place. Vanderstein's probably one of the steadiest I've ever seen. Most of them, oh my God, an 8 ohm speaker could go down to 3 ohms, and it could probably, within the audio passband that you listen to, or range of frequencies, what a passband is, it could go up to like 60 or 100 ohms, and it's constantly changing. Now, the only reason that gobbledygook matters to you is that means that trying to design or engineer a cable to go from your amplifier to your loudspeaker is a mess. You have nothing you can count on. The numbers are all over the place. And there's something that people have overlooked for years. Actually, not entirely, because going back to the beginning, one of the ways it was understood by Bell Labs and AT&T that you could make an ideal cable with less noise and less distortion was to deal with something called a transmission line. And what that meant is that, like, say, back in the days that we all had an aerial on our roofs, you had this coaxial cable that came down from your roof and came to a little outlet in your wall. And if you took a look at that little coaxial cable, it was printed right on the outside jacket, 75 ohms. Now, if you took an ohm meter and you measured across it or measured either end of it, is it 75 ohms? No, it's a fraction of an ohm. What did they mean by 75 ohms? That's the characteristic impedance. They were counting on a source component or antenna or something like that that came out precisely 75 ohms, and you were going into a piece of electronics that had an impedance that was precisely 75 ohms. And if you did that and you designed your cable for a characteristic impedance of 75 ohms, noise and distortion plummeted. So if we look to the first audiophile cable that was ever made for loudspeakers that people know about, which were distributed by Polk Audio, it was a Japanese concern, that was a braided Litz cable that was about 7 ohms. Wow, very close to the nominal 8 ohms that most speakers had. This should just fix everything. Well, it didn't. In fact, it blew a lot of amplifiers up because of the capacitance that it had. Why did that fail? Because the engineer didn't look at the fact that it's not enough to be close with characteristic impedance. It's got to be nailed or the whole thing doesn't work. A good broadcast engineer could have told that in 2 seconds flat. So if you're going to have variable impedance, having any characteristic impedance in your cable is causing nothing but distortion and nonlinear, like problems with the noise that's coming in. So if I can't make an ideal impedance with my cable, how about just get rid of it? That's what we did with zero. Zero does not mean 0 ohms DC resistance. It's not a superconductor. We can't do that on this planet. It just means that A characteristic impedance is defined in two ways. The physical distance between your positive and your negative, your high and your low, whatever you want to call it, and the insulation material that keeps those two wires from shorting. That's called your dielectric. We isolated the dielectrics of your higher and your lower, your plus and your minus with 100% shielding, drain them, to the most effective end. Very simple idea. Not my idea. RCA, no, excuse me, not RCA. Western Electric did this in a projector in 1933. I discovered it as a teenager. So when you do this, effectively, what you do is you get rid of the characteristic impedance at virtually all frequencies until you get up into well into the gigahertz range. And by doing that, tons of your distortions plummet. And all of a sudden, you have a cable that's much closer to our ideal of no cable. I always usually start where I've got a monoblock or stereo amp wedged right against the loudspeaker's terminal barrier, and up on carts and books and so forth, and about 2 inches of cable. Mm-hmm. I want 8 feet, 10 feet, 15 feet of cable to sound like that 2 inches. The closer I get to that, the happier I am. That's one of the things that Zero got us. With the GND, the ground noise dissipation, what that did was it took all of our noise dissipation ideas, as well as the way Zero greatly expands and linearizes noise dissipation that's already there. But we took it even further for people that they're lucky enough to be able to buy wire or buy amp. The only thing about ground noise dissipation is I discovered that idea. It's a phase cancellation network. I discovered that for the AC cords. The problem with using that in a speaker cable is it works so well, you actually lose a little bit of the top half octave of audio at very, very low levels. If you put it in a scope at 0 VU, it'll pass like anything else. But at very, very low signal levels, it can't tell the difference between noise and a little bit of your signal if it's very, very high frequency. So we limit that to 10,000 hertz and below. But what's so great about it is I can take the transient intermodulation, that stuff that makes you wince when you play the amplifier and things are getting a little loud, the stridency, that's oftentimes transient intermodulation. I can lower that in an amplifier by draining that noise that's sitting there and playing havoc with the output stage, and take it away and burn it up in the voice coils of the speaker.
Wow. Amazing. I don't know about you guys, but that was probably one of the best explanations I've heard of impedance and, shall we say, matching and that kind of thing in that regard. And what's funny is we deal with so many different impedances in this business, and every one is different, and the way it has to be handled is different. And wow, again, thank you very much for sharing that with us. That was amazing. So I wanted to ask a little bit about in this crazy world right now, have you had to change the way you all work and that kind of thing? I know California was closed down for a little bit, but I just wanted you to share your story, as I've asked everybody else, if you don't mind.
It was very scary in March. We lost some people. Some people we were able to bring back. Some people, unfortunately, we couldn't. I've gone from doing 3 or 4 people's jobs to doing 5 or 6 people's jobs. Yep. I'm single, so I can kind of get away with that. We're all working from home with Zoom a lot more than we were before. I'm still coming into the office. Some people almost never have to. There's just certain things there's no other way for me to do. Certainly production is still in the production area. Everybody's using the best distancing, the best, disinfecting, like masks wherever possible. For office things, mandatory. Some of the people that are doing hard grunt work, they can't breathe or concentrate. So we, make sure that it's a cloistered group and that other people don't have access to them. And, best practices. We've got a really good temperature gun. Everyone's measured every day. You've even got the beginnings of symptoms, you've just earned yourself a 2-week vacation.
Yep. Well, I'm glad y'all are being careful. I don't know if y'all have had any instances. You don't need to share that with me, but I hope everybody's been safe and good.
One and he's in great shape.
Awesome. Happy to hear that. Happy to hear that. You know, I've had a few friends that have had some difficulty, and also one that has you know, no taste and that kind of stuff, and still hasn't come back weeks later. And it's very bothersome for me to know that he's going through that. I couldn't imagine what it would be like not to taste food. So it's one of my favorite things. Outside of music, food's it, and that live music I can't wait to get back to. So
Oh, I'm a musician. It's driving me nuts.
I can just imagine.
Unfortunately, I don't know when this is coming back.
I don't either, but you know, again, we all do our best, take care of each other, and you know, come out of this thing, and that's what matters. And you know, one thing is fortunate, we all work in kind of the you know, people are looking things for their homes to improve their home, and we certainly have got that. And so it's a wonderful thing to be able to be in that. It is what keeps us very healthy. We have been fortunate. We've actually done a nice piece of business during this time. I'm not going to tell you we're breaking the bank or anything, but certainly doing a nice piece of business in my entire cruise here. By the way, while I was sitting here just outside my door, a gentleman that bought one power cable from me about 7-8 months ago, came back two months after that and bought 5 more. And so anyway, he's a perfect example of one of those people. I'm not sure what he did while he was here because I couldn't see, but anyway, probably bought another power cord. Anyway, so anyway, we're kind of done with the HiFi chats. We have a bunch of questions. So I want to get started with those. And again, I'll ask y'all, if you will, like and subscribe to the channel. Go to hifibuys.com and sign up to the newsletter. This is HiFi Chats number 14 with Garth Powell, who is Senior Director of Engineering at AudioQuest. Again, just an incredible education I've gotten today. I hope everybody else has out there as well. So our first question is from Tony S. Hello, Tony. In a 2-channel stereo setup, how much do you gain with the Niagara 1200 versus PowerQuest 3000? I believe is what PowerQuest 300. I think you make a PowerQuest 3. So Tony, we're going to go to your next question. If you don't mind, define that for me, if you will. Whether you're looking at a PowerQuest 3 versus the Niagara 1200 or versus the Niagara 3000.
It's a considerably different answer.
Yeah, I know. I understand that. He means PowerQuest 3. So between the Niagara 1200 and the PowerQuest 3, and part of that's going to have to do a little bit with the, you know, the level of the system and that kind of thing as to what you might get out of it. But if you want to, go ahead and answer that.
Okay. You will never regret upgrading to at least an Energy Z or Z and a 1200 versus the 3. And the 3 is incredible. But it's, you know, and it's one of those things where I really have to emphasize that, because when people look online or they look at some of the basic electrical specs, it's sort of like, wow, these look to be like almost the same thing.
Right.
So one of them's hand built. There were so many things that I could do. The level of parts, you know, like the level of construction in the entire Niagara series, it's other level. It's other level. There will eventually be PowerQuest pieces that'll be more expensive. They'll be component pieces, more expensive than a Niagara 1200. And if you ask the same question and said, it's for a 2-channel system, not a home theater where I need other application, I would still say Niagara 1200 with a good cord. You know, like that's the whole thing. But the PowerQuest 3 is great. But the fact that you asked that question leads me to believe that you might be pushing your budget a little bit with the 1200. Granted, well, I'm happy to tell you, I'm not going to encourage you to get, you know, like something from the Mythical Creatures series or something like that and say, you've got to spend thousands on the power cord. No, you can get the least expensive cord that we recommend with the you know, the Energy Z. But even just that combination together is a transformative upgrade from a PowerQuest 3, as good as the PowerQuest 3 is.
Yep. No doubt about it. And by the way, we do very generous trade ups. So on the power cords and that kind of thing, we've done that for many folks already. So again, we're here to try and help you in that regard to get what you want out of it. And if it takes a little time to get there, we're fine with that. But absolutely, the Niagara 1200 is, again, a bit more of a handmade upper end product, whereas the PowerQuest units are a bit more on the kind of a little more of the mass produced and meant to really do things for most people. Okay. So Tony, we've got another question from you here. Does the 1200 have the transient power correction feature?
No, couldn't afford to do it at that price point, number one, and number two, there's no space for it. It would be at least 50% larger if I were to try to put that technology inside it. But we also couldn't have come close to hitting that price.
So where does that come in at?
At the 3,000.
Yep. Okay.
So yeah, all the component pieces have that technology. The 5,000 and the 7,000 have the same amount, but more than the 3,000.
Okay. Tony, I'll let you know. We're happy to, I don't know if you live in Atlanta or whatever, but if you're close or we can ship you something, we're happy to try and loan you something and, you know, just for you to have the experience. So please don't hesitate. Okay. You'll find we're real easy on this stuff, guys. AudioQuest is very, very good to me. I'm very good to them. And together we have a very wonderful relationship. And, you know, we want you guys to be able to experience these things. So let's see, GT. Hello, GT. My modem network router and switch are plugged into APC battery backup and surge protector unit, something like a BX1000M. Does the APC unit act as a linear power supply? If not, is there a product that you recommend?
Okay, so here's the thing. I have to be practical about this. I came from Furman, so I understand that, you know, there are some applications where your first priority is that your router can never go down, your switcher can never go down. If your APC is, like effectively a double conversion, if it is non-switching type, if you have a premium one that, that usually means it can't be a small one. I don't know their serial numbers and I can't look it up in front of me. So if you're talking about something that's probably at least $3,000 or more, that's double conversion, that's a rack mount unit, that's fairly serious, it's not going to be the best performance where filtering is concerned. It's certainly not the best performance where surge is concerned. It's one of those 3-mode sacrificial devices that I don't love, but I'm sympathetic. If you're in a situation, particularly for business, where this can never go down and you need battery backup, that happens instantly, fine. Now, here's the problem though. A lot of places that sell, like information technology, or places you can go to, that'll sell you computers and computer peripherals, will try to sell the inexpensive consumer grade battery backup units. Well, those aren't double conversions. And the problem is almost all computer pieces are switching power supplies. That typical battery backup piece is not going to be able to switch over even close to being fast enough for a switching power supply. So as soon as you've got a power outage, your system's going down anyways. It's not going to help you. And as a filter goes and as surge suppressors go, I'm sorry, it's a $20 strip. That's what those things are. So if you care about performance,
he does.
You would want to be looking at a PQ3, a PQ2, or a Niagara 1200. I can assure you. The only thing about those technologies is I can't do battery backup. If we have a blackout, we have a blackout. We're about to reboot.
Yep. Okay. Let's see. Next question from GT as well. This is actually one of the questions I was going to ask, so thank you very much for asking it, GT. What are the pros and cons of using a Niagara power conditioner versus using a battery or power supply regenerator?
Okay, well, with a battery device, again, the only reason that you would ever look at something like that, again, these technologies are like a toolkit. You
Yep.
put the right tool in the right place. So I am sympathetic to double conversion battery backup when I have, an office where I have critical servers, or I have things that can never go down under any circumstances. But the problem is that you pay a hefty price for something like this because those devices add a boatload of impedance to the line. So your amplifier is it's just death for them performance-wise. They almost always are 3-mode, sacrificial surge suppression. That's not doing you any favors long-term or short-term if it's a catastrophic, surge that comes in. At, best case, the filters are usually inexpensive. They're non-linear. And, essentially, sonically, you'd be better off directly into the wall. So that's that. Now, if you talk about the best regenerators, which are not battery backup devices, these are the best of the ones made by others, one by Isotech in the UK. I believe Burmeister makes one in Germany. PS Audio has been doing this for years. Those have some attributes that are good, some that are not. Again, it's just like, what's better, solid state or valves? Well, show me the application. The thing about regeneration is it makes so much sense if you look at this in the abstract. If I were coming right out of electronics school or engineering school, I'd make a beeline for that. It makes so much sense because you put an oscilloscope on your wall outlet. That's supposed to be 60 hertz. That doesn't look like a good sine wave. That's just got nothing but hash on it. Some of them are so distorted, it looks almost like a chopped waveform. That's terrible. So I've got a technology that can give me a very tightly regulated 120 volts and a perfect sine wave. I'm done. How can you get better than this? Well, you got to look at the whole thing, the whole problem holistically. First of all, wait a minute. If we're feeding an AC synchronous motor like a 1970s turntable, that's your gold standard right there. But if we're talking about the rest of the components in a system, well, wait a minute. It's a power supply that's about to convert AC, alternating current, into DC like you have in a battery through rectification. That's what they all do. Your circuits don't run off of AC, they run off of DC, direct current. So making a low distortion, perfect sine wave does those components no good. It helps them in no way because they're about to turn anywhere from 2% harmonic distortion to 20% harmonic distortion into 0% harmonic distortion through bridge rectification. They're running off of DC supplies, number one. Number two, a noise reduction system needs to be linear, consistent across all frequencies. Well, if we do regeneration, how do we do that? When we convert from DC back to AC, we generate that AC supply by making an AC amplifier. Power amplifiers, what do they have? Well, they have an output and they have a frequency response. What's that frequency response? Most good power amplifiers, maybe at best 0 hertz to 1 hertz up to 200K, maybe 250 kilohertz. What happens to a power amplifier at 500 kilohertz, at 1 megahertz? They have no output. In fact, they might be over 100 decibels down because when they run out of steam, they run out quick. 200 kilohertz is generous with most power amplifiers. Where does radio frequency induced noise start? The AM radio band. Where's that start? 540 kilohertz. How much is regeneration helping radio waves? It's not. It's helping the noise that's induced from your appliances and so forth. But the radio waves, the only way that they're going to affect those is if they put in a passive filter after the regenerator. Got a power amplifier. You need as low impedance as you can possibly get. Ideally, if I could get some extra current through, power factor correction to that power supply, that would be good. But I'm feeding my power amplifier now with regeneration through another power amplifier. What do power amplifiers all have in common? Well, after you succeed their full rated output, at a certain point they clip. Where do they clip? At 1.414 times the fundamental. Let's say we've got a 10 amp, power regenerator. Okay, that means at 14 amps, it's into clipping. That means, usually 3% TA total harmonic distortion, not bad, but that means at 20 amps or at 30 amps, it looks worse than your wall outlet. You gotta look at what you're trying to do technologically, and you gotta find the best average. Is a power conditioner, is a power filter, is an isolation transformer, is transient power correction perfect? No, nothing ever will be. But you gotta look at the best overall averages. Again, it's not the parts, it's not the buzzwords, it's what you did. I can build regenerators and amplifiers all day long. I was trained to do it since I was a teenager. I built regulators when I was at Furman. If power regeneration was the best mousetrap, believe you me, that's what I would build. I stay away from them with a vengeance because it can't work for what I'm trying to do.
Okay. That was actually pretty good understanding of that. So, and it kind of gives you an idea that, regeneration is the buzzword, but there's so many other things involved as you basically get to the products themselves, meaning outside of that box and into the next box, that it has a lot of effect on it. So anyway, thank you for that. All right, GT, I hope that covers you. All right, Ed S. Any plans for AQ to add a diamond USB A to C to the line of cables?
I don't know if it'll be called diamond because we're, manufacturing a bunch of new and designing a number of new digital cables right at this moment, which, will take 1 to 2 years to come out. The HDMIs have to come out first. That's basically this fall, but the names are changing to correspond with the new speaker cable names and so forth. It'll be more in alignment with those. So what used to be diamond might end up being Firebird, for example. In terms of whether we will have that specific connection, this I don't know. It's still too early to determine.
Okay.
But that's a good email to to AudioQuest, either from Alan or on our website.
Send it to me and I'll make sure they get it.
Yeah.
I'll send it to DE. All right. Thank you very much for that, Ed. And Dave W., what testing has AQ done to prove skin effect on the DC signal of the cables? Theoretically, it only occurs in AC signals, but I can hear the difference with the DBS system.
Well, because again, the thing is that the skin effect is real because it has nothing to do with the primary signal. For example, a lot of people don't know this, but when you look at that arrow that's on an AudioQuest cable, usually it's on the breakout or it's on the connector or something like that. And years ago, before I worked for AudioQuest, I was still using a number of their cables along with some other people's. And, I always looked at it, and as a fairly, bright engineer, I thought, oh, yeah, I know what they're doing. That's obvious. It's a shielded cable, and they're terminating on one end so that they're not modulating, what comes in on, the shield. And they're typically going to the load end because that's where you're going to, cascade the signal up and therefore not create as much of a problem with where you're draining your noise from. Yeah, I'm right on top of what they're doing, no problem. Then I get my first few months at AudioQuest, and I'm watching one of the educational trainings one of their regional sales managers is doing for some other visitors, and I'm taking place in this because I want to learn from this and see what they do. And they're explaining, oh no, all of our individual wires, particularly all the primary ones, no, they're all trained for directionality. And I'm like, how's that work? Really? And then, because before I understood the process, I doubted. You have to prove it to me. And then it was a situation where when I asked more questions to Bill Lowe and Joe Harley, they were explaining, oh, well, all the wires go in the direction of that arrow. And I was trying to explain to them, oh, wait. That's not how physics works here, guys. If you've got a signal, it goes from source to load, like your arrow, from source to load. Yeah, the signal goes in this direction, but the returner, the negative or the low, goes the opposite direction. It's a circuit. It can't work this way. And they're like, well, it sounds better that way though. And this is where I had to start testing. What I realized was the parasitic noise that comes in has nothing to do with the primary signal until it unfortunately modulates with it and joins it. At that point, we're screwed. We're trying to avoid that. But the parasitic signal that comes in, and this getting back to this gentleman's question, it doesn't matter if it's a DC signal, an AC signal, it doesn't matter if it's a digital signal, it's parasitic noise. And the parasitic noise is going to look at the skin effect because that skin effect is resistance. Resistance follows the path of least resistance. So wherever you want to drain, that noise to, the load end or the source end, pick your poison And that's where you have those wires drain to. So the skin effect that we are dealing with, that we optimize for, has to do with parasitic noise. It has nothing to do with the signal, because the primary signal is going to go one direction on positive and return the other. No matter what you do, there's nothing you can do to convince it to do anything other than what it will do.
Wow. Interesting thought. Wow. As they always say, it is what it is. All right.
That's no further my explanation.
No, that was great. That was great. All right. Dave W., thank you. So from Ruby Area 58, any plans to make a Niagara with just 4 high current outlets for amplifiers and power speakers distance from front end? I think it's a great idea, because he's got a Niagara 5000 currently with 8 unused outlets for just amp and Vandersteins.
Now, here's the bad news. You're not going to save much money, because I have to use almost all the same internal parts. But the reason that that's been on the drawing board since the beginning, and the reason that we will ultimately do it, I've just had so many other things in front of it. It's been slow to happen. But what I want is 4 outlets, and I want a ergonomic shape that can fit behind a speaker, that can fit behind a subwoofer, that can fit behind a monoblock. And hide a little bit. That, be a little bit, like taller vertically, but not, be so wide or so deep. That's essentially what I'm looking about. It won't necessarily be that cheaper, because again, it'll, the outlets cost something, but they don't cost that much. Most of what's inside of 5000 is what's going to be inside this.
Right. There's going to be like $500 maybe, if that.
Yeah, 500 to $1,000 less. It couldn't, at best, differential. Yeah.
Yep, I understand that. Okay. Thank you for that question, Ruby Area 58. I like the idea there. And I also like the design about it being able to go behind the amplifier. Less boxes we can see, the happier she is. All right, Dave W.
Well, currently, she's thrilled with those 7RU monoblocks in the middle of the living room.
Absolutely. Yeah, the new Relentless by D'Agostino. She loves them. I will tell you, I've had a lot of women comment they do like them. So anyway, so Dave.
Well, those meters are gorgeous.
Yeah, they are. We just put in a stereo momentum in a house this week, and wow, just beautiful product. All right, so Dave W., if I have a Niagara 1200 and I'm only pulling 3.5 amps on a 15 amp line, will I hear a difference in the transients with a 20 amp breaker and 10 gauge wire?
Are you using a power amplifier?
Yes.
Yes, you will. Basically, your power amplifier, whether it's Class D or whether it's Class A, whether it's small or whether it's light, whether you've got efficient speakers, inefficient speakers, or in between, whether you listen loud or you listen soft, your power amplifier relative to your whether to a loudspeaker is never going to be an efficient transfer of energy. And the power supply of your amplifier is a lot of what you're listening to in an power amplifier. And that power supply wants to see 0 ohms. The closer you get to that, the better off you'll be.
Okay.
Go here.
I have always
get one of our outlets.
Well, I think there's one there. One of the things that I have always told folks, and I did this experiment a long, long time ago, and that was actually add a breaker to my box, run a 10 gauge wire with a power outlet all the way out to another system that we had, I think 12 gauge wire on or 14 gauge wire on. And it was amazing. So it's been a staple of mine. And when people say, hey, I'm doing this, what should I do? 10 gauge wire by an AudioQuest outlet, and I promise you'll hear it. So, all right, let's see. I've got lost in my questions here a little bit, but anyway, thank you for them all, Chris. Any questions? Okay, and 1200. Any thoughts? Okay, so Ed S. Any thoughts on making a smart power switch outlet? And I love this idea. That's quieter than what the consumer marketplace has now. Love having the ability to turn on my subs with a voice command, but I imagine that the low-end Wemo switch is quite noisy.
Yeah, we're going to leave that for other folks. I suppose I shouldn't say that, because I don't totally determine those things, but for the most part, when I'm faced with with a couple of options of bad and really bad, I essentially like to avoid that and blame the other manufacturer for what doesn't work very well. It's just a situation where when you're thrown into, well, it was the same thing when I was with Furman. We got to the point where a good chunk of our business was broadcasters and home theater integrators that needed cloud-based IP control. And look, I'm with them. I agree. It's a tool in the arsenal that you just can't do without when you don't want to roll a truck, and you know that you've got a couple of things in your rack that are just constantly going to need rebooting. If you know that, that's the right tool in the right place. The problem with something like that is sonically, it's a disaster. Yep. It causes more noise back on your signal than all of the RF noise that's in your atmosphere, and like half of what was coming through the AC line. The CPUs are dreadful.
So I think what we've learned today is that signals are precious, and we need to be very, very careful about how we handle them to have high performance. And it doesn't take $100,000 system to have high performance. So you end up finding it can be had at almost any level. We just have to be careful about how we build it. So let's see, are there any differences from this is from Ruby Area 58 again, are there any differences from your design POV in powering solid state versus 2-gear in both amplifier and source components?
Yes and no, and I will make it more specific, because what you have to add to that equation is, again, it's a circuit. We haven't completed the circuit without the loudspeaker. You can't answer that question without knowing the loudspeaker. Now, I would make an assumption, and it could be an erroneous one, but usually if I see a valve amplifier, particularly a classic valve amplifier, I probably have a loudspeaker that doesn't need a ton of damping factor. It has its own subwoofer amplification internally, or it is a loading that is fairly easy. It has been designed around the minimum damping factor of a valve amplifier. In other words, it's a very fast, very transient accurate bass system. In a situation like that, I can probably get away with less DC resistance in my cable. So for example, in a situation like that, I could get away with, in our new, like zero and bass systems, I could get away with William Tell, I could get away with Robin Hood, versus say Thunderbird, where yes, there are differences in the insulation material or the amount, but one of the biggest differences is just literally the amount of conductor. On the other hand, if I've got, because it's really less the amplifier and more the loudspeaker. If I, for instance, had something like a Bowers and Wilkins D3 800 or 802, which is a fine loudspeaker, a very high performance one, but that what I would call a fourth order kind of slow bass. In a situation like that, I want a power amplifier that's solid state. I want it to put a vice grip on those woofers, and I want the lowest DC resistance, biggest cables we make. Because I got to control that bass. And if I don't control that bass, it's going to have repercussions all the way up to the treble.
Okay. Yep. I've talked to Richard an awful lot about that on his speakers, and kind of that we don't need to use the real top end thing, especially on his bass line. That's awesome. So, all right, let's see. Thank you, Ruby Area 58. Great question. Dave W. Who is your favorite drummer?
Oh, there just can't be one, because there's so many, and they're all so different for so many reasons. I mean, I'm very partial to a lot of the people that I studied with. I studied with Tony Williams for 2 years. I took master classes with Max Roach, Elvin Jones, but I love a lot of the avant-garde so-called jazz drummers, Sonny Murray, like Andrew Cyril from Europe, Tony Oxley, like Han Benning. There's so many great ones.
Do you feel like you model yourself after any of them?
No, and in that world, you steadfastly avoid it. It's
Yeah.
all about your own uniqueness and creativity.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Dave W. Great question, especially for a drummer or a percussionist, I should say. Jeff O., what are the potential issues with mixing different brands of cables in a system? I think that is an awesome question.
Okay, so there's some instances where I will, beg people to use AudioQuest. If you buy a Niagara, at like my get on my knees and beg thing has to do with the cord that feeds it, because I can't make my ground noise dissipation work without an AudioQuest cable.
Absolutely.
Because unfortunately at this point, we're the only ones that are doing directionality to ground and the circuit depends on it. Anything else will make that circuit resonate and God knows what's going to happen. If you've got other people's power cables coming out of the Niagara or the PowerQuest or just stock ones, okay. Would I prefer mine? Probably, but I'll be reasonable about that. That's fine. Now, where the rest of the system is concerned, there's a lot of reviewers these days that, one of the current things that's in vogue, including by some reviewers that are very good friends of mine, that'll talk about the loom theory. The loom theory sounds really good on its face, except that it's got little fallacies like, well, what kind of wire do you have inside the components? What kind of wire do you have inside the loudspeaker? You can't be purist about this. You can't be perfect. It's just not going to happen. So in the end of the day, you do what works. And, who am I to argue with somebody that says, Garth, I don't really know why. I know that you think that the Dragon's the most expensive, and I know it's a great cable, but I found on my system that I preferred Hurricane. Or I know that into a source component, I'm supposed to use the source, Hurricane, power cord, but I tried the higher current one onto my DAC and I preferred the way it sounded. Even though, like on your website, it says not to do it that way. To which I say, great, whatever works, because every one of these systems, your system, my system, these are snowflakes. No two are the same. And you do, in the end of the day, what you have to do to make it work and work within the constraints of your budget. But be aware of, on the other hand, a couple of things. One is that you need to have a great, dealer, and you have to have great professionals like Alan and his team to work with, because you have to understand that what is just harmoniously perfect right now can fall apart tomorrow with one change, one only system change, one chord, one little isolation device, everything changes. And you have to know that it's not the last thing you put in your system that's necessarily at fault. And it's not that the magic's never going to come back. The magic could not only come back, but get better, but you might have to change the position on your speaker. You might have to change the L-pad settings in the back of the speaker. You might have to adjust the VTA on your tone arm a little teeny bit, whatever it is, because everything affects everything else.
Yeah, I think this is something I run into an awful lot, where people will borrow a cable from me and say, I don't like it as much as the other one. And I wish sometimes we could go farther than that to help them understand kind of what is doing it, because I won't always know. There's not absolute, rigidity to this. It's a matter of trying to figure it out, and that's what we're very much here to help you do. So anyway, great question, great answer. All right, let's see, Leo. Okay, my stock question, and I know what answer you're going to get for this. What 2 albums would you grab if you had to leave in an emergency? That is such a difficult question, especially for someone like yourself. I mean, I know one album. You already mentioned it.
No, actually, it won't be that one. And the reason for that is because that one is still widely available.
Okay.
I can still get that one. In an emergency, There probably, there's a, there's potentially a John Cage, like a very early one on CRI I'm going to grab. There's a avant jazz, like an album by one of my original, drum teachers from college, Marshland by George Marsh and Mel Graves. I'll probably grab. And so I'm trying to think.
There's only 2, you're done.
Okay, I guess I'm done. Basically, what it would be, I would define this by how rare they are and how impossible it is to replace them.
Yep. Great question and great answer as well. I would tell you to find a little place for those. You just never know.
Stuff like that. The truth of the matter is that my vinyl collection is alphabetized because by the composer or player, because it was my musical taste is so eclectic. It just became the only way I could do this.
Yep. Mine's the same way.
The matter is that if there's a fire, I probably lost them.
Yep.
There's actually some musical instruments I would grab before that.
I'm sure of it. Very good. Very, very good. All right, Leo's got another question for you. Any chance of seeing a DAC built upon the Dragonfly line, but one more in line with a home audio component? Should say, but more in line.
I never decide things like this for Bill Lowe. It's not proper of me to do it. But my guess in the, at least in the short term, is absolutely not. Because again, we don't get into a market typically if we cannot demonstrate why we jumped into that part of the market. We would have to demonstrate, here's what we did that's never been done before, and at this price point, it's demonstrably better than everything else. That's a real high bar, even with Gordon Rankin helping us out, because of how crowded that market is.
Yes. Yep. It is very crowded. So I could see that, because y'all are one of those, we need to build the best of what we have within the particular ranges we're in. And if we can't do that, we don't build it. And your Dragonfly right now is all over that world. And I know it's selling like weeds, because I know we're selling them like weeds. So an amazing product. The new Cobalt is really nuts. All right. We are done with questions. So anyway, I wanted to thank everybody for joining us, and most especially you, Garth, for taking so much time out of your day. We went almost 3 hours. You and Richard are kind of right in that same veer, so no wonder y'all had so many conversations together. I love both you guys.
He did say I would never shut up, so it hasn't changed.
I learn from both of you guys every time I talk to you, and all the other folks that I work with. These hi-fi chats have been so much fun for me, and I can't wait to do more of them. I've learned a lot. I know that everybody out there has learned a lot. We've heard an awful lot of stuff in the store, and I've actually done quite a bit of business from these things as well. So we appreciate your time. So folks out there, this has been Alan Jones with Hi-Fi Chats number 14 at Hi-Fi Buys. Garth Powell, Senior Director of Engineering, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
He is letting the recording catch up. I guess there's something with YouTube or something that does this, and hopefully I'm not going to be on the recording. I think he can cut it off when he wants to, so we'll give it just a minute here. That was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great explanations, stuff that people could follow and understand and that kind of thing.